Oh, wow, look at the crowd. Okay, Quay. Good afternoon, chiefs, technicians, and delegates. Economic reconciliation is vital for the prosperity of First Nations. We know that historically injustices faced by First Nations have left a legacy of economic disparities, social inequalities, and cultural disconnection, which is why it's important that discussions around economic development be tied to reconciliation, self-determination, and land. Removing barriers to economic development will help achieve economic reconciliation and close the social economic gaps for First Nations. These barriers include the legacy of colonialism, the failure to recognize Indigenous injustices, administrative burdens, limited access to capital, and limited access to federal procurement opportunities. To achieve First Nations self-determination requires everyone to work with First Nations in good faith. This is achieved by respecting First Nations' inherent rights, treaties, and self-determination, while also fostering a business-friendly environment that attracts investments and supports economic development. Economic reconciliation requires substantive efforts to overcome the effects of land and economic disposition. Infrastructure development is essential. Ensuring that First Nations have access to clean water, reliable energy, and high-speed internet is not only a matter of justice, but a foundation for economic growth. The recent AFN Closing the Infrastructure Gap report estimates that over $349 billion is needed to ensure the infrastructure gap by 2030 for First Nations. Another barrier to closing the infrastructure gap in First Nations is a lack of reliable access to capital and financing on equitable and affordable terms. It is also critical to encourage a meaningful consultation and partnership with First Nations and all the matters that affect them. First Nations' role as stewards of the land must be recognized, and benefits of First Nation lands must be shared fairly. As the draft resolution mentions, Indigenous Services Canada is creating an economic reconciliation framework. First Nations must be involved in this work. First Nations-led means that First Nations decide how they will participate and who will participate on their behalf. Full and effective participation in all development processes and the need for a genuine partnership in the ownership with Canada of these processes is essential to meet the requirements of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The path to economic reconciliation is one that demands our commitment. In this plenary, we will hear from the Honourable Senator Paul Prosper on reconciliation. Next, you will hear from Jordan Baptiste on self-determination at the English River First Nation. Lastly, Shannon Metabim from the National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association will present on the First Nations Procurement Authority. And I will close with a brief sentiment on First Nations, Madawaska First Nation. I was chief for 10 years in Madawaska. I was taking the Can-Do Economic Development Officer program. We had 16 modules in that program. We happened to only get 2 modules a year, so it took me 8 years to become a certified ECDEV officer. And I became chief of my community in 2003. And with that education that I had in economic development, I was able to build a beautiful power center called the Grey Rock Power Center. If you're driving into the east, it's exit 19 on the Trans-Canada Highway. You will find beautiful truck stop, casino, hotel, strip mall, multiple other businesses which stand alone, whether it's snowmobile dealerships. And that's just the beginning. When I left, this is what we had, and now we still have maybe 20, 30 acres left to fill to become a really true power center, one-stop shop. And I'm very, very proud of the work that my community has done in economic development, and it's essential that every First Nation has an economic development officer. Just a little insight to when I became chief in 2003. Even prior to that, I was working as a ECDEV officer, and our community being as small as it is, we got $18,000 in our budget for economic development, which was not enough to pay for my salary. So I was only working part-time. But it's essential that the government antes up and gives every community, I would say, a base amount of $75,000 and then per population after that. But it hasn't happened yet, and this was over 20 years ago. So I will, as the portfolio holder for economic development, I will lobby the INAC and CERTA to ensure that every community has a full-time economic development officer, whether you're big or small. You can't say because you're a small community you don't need it, because it doesn't matter. The economic development is a full-time position, and in order for us to prosper, they have to ante up and make sure that each community has efficient funds to at least hire their economic development officer and work with them to access what they may need to be successful in economic development. And I want to thank you very much, and now I welcome Senator Paul Prosper. Thank you.
Could you give me a heads up a minute? Yeah, sure. Thank you, Regional Chief Bernard, and I just want to recognize your previous life dealing with economic development, and you mentioned Grey Rock. It's an incredible development there. They really helped our community understand sort of the relationship and the dynamics of creating a development project. So I really want to recognize your community. So going it up to it, I am honored to be here at this great assembly on this territory in the presence of custom, protocol, tradition, prayer, and ceremony. I want to recognize our Grand Chief Norman Siliboy. I am here to add some to the discussion about economic reconciliation. Some define economic reconciliation as the inclusion of Indigenous peoples, communities, and businesses in all aspects of economic activity. In this context, reconciliation and inclusivity are both similar in meaning and scope. Many First Nation communities view economic development as a path to self-sufficiency. Economic reconciliation or inclusivity creates a space where Indigenous values, practices, sovereignty, and culture are respected by government, industry, and non-government organizations. And as we know, many First Nations face barriers alongside many opportunities. A 2019 report by the National Indigenous Development Board found that Indigenous people face deeply rooted systemic barriers embodied in the Canadian economic landscape. Some of these stem from the Indian Act and its restrictive land regime, the failure to recognize or implement treaties, and the systemic exclusion of Indigenous people from the economic system through regulatory barriers and bureaucratic hurdles. And of course, as mentioned previously, access to capital being a major consideration, and there is certainly a need for the role of government and the private sector to take space in this area, not only for large projects, but also for medium and small-sized projects as well. Current investment vehicles like trust structures are not appropriate for First Nations in certain settings. And as we know, Indigenous governments don't have the same access to public and private capital as other governments do. Other barriers include timely accounting for financial statements, ensuring interests, land tenure, and trustee responsibilities. Added to that is the element of risk, because risk is related to providing affordable capital to Indigenous borrowers. The question being, is risk being appropriately priced and understood by the private sector? And also the need to learn from lessons from different government partnerships with private sectors. The features of economic reconciliation and inclusivity have a balance between economic returns with environment, social impacts that will be had on community values, culture, and history, and governance, whether it's at the board, executive, or managerial level. Early in my appointment as senator, my Director of Parliamentary Affairs, Claudine Santos, suggested that I undertake a listening tour. From February to October of this year, we met with over 1,700 people, about 184 hours in meetings, and over 1,300 pages of notes. We wanted to learn about the achievements, stories, issues, and priorities. We released our report titled Reconciliation last October 1st on Treaty Day in Nova Scotia. It can be found at my website, pjprosper.ca, and it highlights 7 themes, which include governance, health and social issues, economic development, lands and resources, justice, infrastructure, citizenship, language, culture, and history. Reconciliation will provide a roadmap for the work of my Senate office. This story tells us that it's vital for Ilnu to take control of their own affairs in order for people to be strong, healthy, and productive members of society. Once achieved, they can focus on generating own source revenues to break the reliance on government and tackle the after effects of intergenerational trauma and build culturally appropriate spaces to work, learn, and play. This will allow Ilnu to develop their own definitions of who belongs to their nation and allow each Ilnu nation to not just survive, but thrive. There is a clear nexus or connection between economic development and lands and resources. But why is economic reconciliation / inclusion so important? And why is it so critical to act now? Last November, a report titled Poverty in Nova Scotia at a Glance was commissioned and published by Senator Kusner, Nova Scotia. It provides, quote, Mi'kmaq communities are the fastest growing child and youth population in the province, with approximately 50% of the population being under 20 years old. First Nations children living on reserve in Nova Scotia had a child poverty rate of 43.5%, compared to 22.4% of non-Indigenous children. And later, this report provides that First Nations Poverty Action Research Project report relies heavily on measuring poverty in the material aspect by measuring levels of income in absolute terms. However, for many First Nations, that is not the case, as poverty relates to more than just material deprivation. For example, in Siboney, elements include community services, culture, education and training, strengthening governance and employment, and business development. During our listening tour, an administrator from Siboney, the Siboney community, informed us that the mortality rate in the community was at 54 years. Chiefs, I had read numerous accounts from leadership, all pointing to the need to act now, that we need a path forward towards economic inclusivity and reconciliation. Consultation and rights recognition can provide one mechanism, the settlement of land claims and additions to reserve, unifying and adding to a clear nexus between claim settlement and First Nations acquiring land. We all benefit from rights recognition, and there are limits to litigation, fostering the need for more negotiated settlements. There is a need for Indigenous financial institutions supporting existing mandates of these financial institutions, amplify solutions led by Indigenous institutions like an Indigenous Development Bank, an Indigenous Auditor General, an Indigenous Investment Commission that can address the infrastructure gap, which is a prominent barrier. We don't need another parliamentary report to study this issue. At page 12 of my reconciliation report, it provides from 1996, when RCAP was published, to present, there have been many parliamentary reports undertaken in both the House of Commons and the Senate that are directly related to First Nation issues, resulting in, I got 1 minute, here we go, 1,468 recommendations over the past 28 years. A cursory analysis of these recommendations show that several were repetitive. For instance, over the years, Parliament has made 463 recommendations related to economic development and resource management. 402 relate to fisheries, and 263 relate to housing operations and management. Yet, these issues still remain. There is a need to seize legislative opportunities. Just to provide an example, today at the Indigenous Peoples Committee, we are hearing witnesses on S268, which is First Nations Gaming on Reserve. This enactment amends Section 207 of the Criminal Code and provides that a governing body of a First Nation has exclusive authority to conduct and manage a lottery scheme on its reserves. Yesterday, I listened to Mark Polansky at a lunch meeting with the National Indigenous Economic Development Board. He shared the need for an Indigenous Sovereignty Wealth Act to hold or pool capital to protect the fund from taxation and help the trust to collect its own revenues for use and investment. These are just two opportunities legislatively that could be pursued, and there's certainly a need to collaborate more from a political and technical level, as well as a legislative level as well. And so with that, with my time running out, I'd like to thank you all for this opportunity. Walalia.
Thank you, Honourable Paul Prosper. So we will now continue with Shannon Metabim. Is it? No. I'm sorry for that. so with Jordan Baptiste, to talk about self-determination.
Great, thank you. No, it's such an honor to be up here with such prominent figures in our space and be able to speak at this event. My name is Jordan Baptiste. I'm Anishinaabe from Kitigan-Zibi, but I have the great honor of working on English River traditional territory, Treaty 6, out of Saskatoon. Together we are advancing reconciliation and building bridges that connect Indigenous communities, government, and the private sector in ways that not only benefit our people, but strengthen the very fabric of Canada. Let me share the story of Nedhe Group, the economic development arm of English River First Nation. A story of vision, resilience, and the power of self-determination. Nearly 40 years ago, English River First Nation, a humble Dene community 700 kilometers north of Saskatoon, recognized opportunities in their traditional territory, home to some of the highest grade uranium deposits in the world. This uranium powers 1 in every 7 homes in the United States, and English River understood that by leveraging their land's wealth, they could create prosperity, not just for their people, but for all of Canada. Nedhe began with a bold decision, the acquisition of Tricon North, which we know is Tron Construction. This wasn't just an investment in a company, it was an investment in control, sovereignty, and opportunity. By taking full ownership, English River ensured their community would determine hiring practices and see the benefits of resource development on their land. What started with one business has grown to a diversified portfolio of 21 businesses under the Nedhe Group umbrella, spanning industries from construction to retail, resource development, and beyond. This reflects the entrepreneurial spirit of English River First Nation and the collective power of Indigenous leadership in shaping Canada's economy. Through treaty land entitlement in the 1990s, English River acquired 140 acres of land south of Saskatoon. What was once undeveloped is now the future site of a state-of-the-art business complex and home to a transformative project, a microbioreactor wastewater treatment plant. Originally designed to support the business park, it now serves the broader community, including the municipality of Corman Park, empowering citizens to move off of traditional septic systems. This is reconciliation in action, where Indigenous innovation benefits all Canadians. Nedhe is also expanding globally. We now own 190,000 acres of resource development land in West Virginia, approximately 1% of the state's landmass, and we will begin collecting royalties this next fiscal year. This step demonstrates how Indigenous nations can lead, stewarding global economic opportunities while remaining rooted in values of self-determination and sustainability. What drew me to Nedhe was its ethos, to be the best possible business that happens to be Indigenous. Our value proposition is not defined by being Indigenous, it is defined by the value we can contribute. Let me highlight 2 ventures that embody this vision. Cedar Leaf Capital, a joint venture between Scotiabank and 3 Indigenous groups across the country, and is poised to become Canada's first majority Indigenous-owned investment dealer, focused on financial advisory services and underwriting Canadian fixed income securities. Cedar Leaf represents a profound milestone in reconciliation, proving Indigenous communities are not just participants, but leaders in shaping Canada's financial future. Creative Fire, acquired by English River in 2019, is the only Indigenous community-owned strategy and creative firm in the country. Committed to advancing reconciliation, Creative Fire works to foster meaningful partnerships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous organizations, creating value that benefits all involved. By embedding reconciliation into corporate strategies, amplifying Indigenous voices, and showcasing Indigenous leadership, Creative Fire helps organizations take real, impactful action towards a more inclusive future. It demonstrates that profitability and social purpose can thrive together, showcasing the vital role of Indigenous perspectives and what it plays in Canada's economy. Nedhe's story is not just our story, it is Canada's story. This year, English River approved a new gas station, elders facility, and band office, funded by profits from our investments. This demonstrates the power of Indigenous-led businesses to create jobs, foster innovation, and build infrastructure that directly benefits our communities. When we unlock the potential of relationships with Indigenous nations, we unlock the potential of Canada itself. Imagine the growth we can achieve when Indigenous communities are fully empowered to contribute to this nation's success. By embracing these partnerships, Canada strengthens its economy, its reputation, and its social fabric. Reconciliation is not just about acknowledging the past, it is about building a shared future where prosperity knows no boundaries. Together, we can create a stronger, more inclusive, and united Canada. Let us commit, not just in words, but in action, to realizing this vision. Thank you.
Thank you. And now to address a framework of economic reconciliation, I would like to invite from NACA, Shannon Metabim.
You have a slide deck? Hey, you have a slide deck? Just they got the one. I'll just leave the first. Wacheg miswe. Kenas komitena miswe jebejita igota. Getsmenende ne beche huitta magianji gebeche anamottaman banne hette sonjigi anamotchagatek. Ashanishtamitna pisam or popon nabetisen hotte banne hette sonjigi chigujtayan. Pitabag nochin, Utanoch, Omashkegoganok, Ufahegon. My name is Shannon Metabim, and I'm from Omashkegoak Territory, Cree, and James Bay. I've been in economic development for 30 years. And as the Senator has pointed out, we're at a critical time where we're creating institutions, policies, laws, legislation to support our community. I always look at why I do this job, and I always look at our past. All of us are lucky to be here. 95% of our population was eliminated when colonizers took our land. So we have been subjected to the goal of being eliminated and our land stolen. But we're at a critical time right now where we're looking for a way to be part of prosperity. We have 300 plus court cases that affirm our rights and title to the land. Each and every one of you has been delegated the responsibility to find prosperity for each of your communities, which is an unbelievable task. You got to find opportunity in your backyard so that your people are not in poverty anymore. Each one of you is struggling, I know that. I've been delivering business loans for 30 years. And now I lead an organization that's delivered 53,000 loans to a value of $3.3 billion. Indigenous financial institutions cover coast to coast to coast, providing Inuit, Métis, and First Nations entrepreneurs with a chance at opportunity and prosperity. And now we're contemplating creating new institutions that make sure that we can be part of the larger opportunities. I always say 3 pillars to any new project in your backyard: equity participation, a robust IBA, and some sort of revenue share. Demand no less. It's our land. They have to recognize that we have the leverage of our territories. That's our resources in the ground, and we'll leave them there as long as they need to be there until we are partners in that resource. And now get to the real deal. I'm here to talk about the Procurement Institute. The Procurement Institute is a new First Nations procurement authority that we want to create. You might have seen in the news, Randy Boissonnault, I don't even know if I'm saying his name right, but he's a cabinet minister that pretended to be an Indigenous person just to take opportunities from us. This is not a new thing. It's been going on for 30 years. There are countless business transactions that have taken place in the billions of dollars of value. That means less opportunity for our people, less impact on the ground for our people. And the AFN supported, and I put a timeline up here of what we've been progressing. It's crazy how long this kind of thing takes when the government wants to push it as far along as possible so that we're not part of the process. But the AFN supported a resolution in 2019 to affirm the planning, to give NACA the mandate to bring organizations together and start planning process. That led to a couple of different groups. An Indigenous reference group was a table that the government put together that we were planning for transforming procurement. And the government started with a $34 million planning budget, and that's been going. The Inuit exited the planning in 22, Métis exited in 22, and CCAB exited in 22. So we continue. AFN reaffirms support to the launch of a procurement organization. And this would be an authority for First Nations. We would verify, certify Indigenous businesses to make sure that the business structure is really going to benefit our community on the ground. FMPO is currently in the process of setting up the legal setup. We have NACA, AFOA, CANDO, FMB, and FNFA, 5 very successful, reputable organizations that provide services to our people. They have the reputation to work with the government. They deliver on a daily basis, and they can get this done. We're still waiting for the government to commit to the process. I was told the other day that they don't want to be colonistic by selecting a partner to work with. I told them that you're being colonistic by not listening to what the rights holders have asked for, which is to launch this First Nation Procurement Authority so that we can get to business. Quit talking about this Indigenous business database that just removed 1,100 businesses because they weren't even Indigenous. They know that there's a problem there. They haven't been doing it right for 30 years. We definitely can do it right. Arrive Can, Minister Bossonneau, Nisha, Pure Spirit, billions going to shell companies. We need to do something better. We're looking for your support. I got an AFN resolution, but for the government, I guess that's not good enough. I've been receiving additional letters of support from regional territorial organizations. Chiefs of Ontario is working on one. Atlantic Canada provided one. I'm here to request letters of support from you to reaffirm your support for a procurement authority to be created for our people so that no more opportunities are lost.
Thank you. And in closing, I want to thank our panel members that are here today sharing their knowledge and experience on this very important topic. Indigenous Service Canada has held 2 economic reconciliation roundtables on February the 8th, 2024, and again on May 27, 2024. Canada has since released a report on each of these roundtables in which key priorities and barriers were shared. In all, First Nations were aware of the required action that's needed for readdressing these issues on access to capital, risk assessment, capacity building, infrastructure gaps, equity ownership in major projects, procurement, and employment and training. As a result of the Canada-led roundtables, Canada has stated that they will continue to build on these conversations. However, we must ensure that First Nations are at the table. We have critical opportunity as First Nations to move beyond the minimum standards set by Canada. For example, Canada's pan-Indigenous approach to the 5% procurement target needs to be distinct-based. Canada should set out procurement targets that ensure that at least 5% total value of contracts are held by First Nation businesses. We need to set actionable standards as Canada moves forward, economic reconciliation towards economic reconciliation. It's time for First Nations to drive this discussion forward and create our own measures for achieving economic reconciliation. I want to highlight the Closing of Infrastructure Gap by 2030 report. In this report, it was identified that the investment needed to close the infrastructure gap for First Nations is to $350 billion. This investment would have substantial benefits in respect to the economic impact it would have on the Canadian economy. For example, the investments would generate $308 billion in GDP and can move Canada from the last place to first place among the G7 countries in average annual GDP per capita growth between 2023 and 2030. For the First Nations workforce, $18.2 billion in labor income would go to First Nation individuals and $202.7 billion in labor income that would generate over 7 years. By removing the barriers to economic development and by creating opportunities for First Nation businesses, the social economic gap will close. Recognition of First Nation rights, recognition of First Nations jurisdiction, business development, labor market training, and strengthening capacity are key aspects to economic reconciliation. Waliwan, Malawan, thank you, merci.
Thank you. I will now turn the mic to Adam for the rest.
Miigwech, thank you very much, and thank you to the panelists. I think that concludes our panel discussion. So, Miigwech, thank you. We'll move along within our agenda. Of course, this morning, a few minutes behind was to be expected, but we had the one panel just before lunch, so we will be doing that at this point. So I'd like to invite the next panelists to make their way up to the front, and please come and join us. So, of course, we have Manitoba Regional Chief Willie Moore is here. Chief Marilyn Slett, I believe, is joining us online. Sharon McIver, if you can please make your way up to the front, as well as Natasha Beattie, Director, AFN Rights and Governance. So if we can have you make your way up to the front, please. We will proceed with the next panel discussion. As I indicated, we are a little bit behind, so we are going to stick to the timeframes that we have. We'll have a little timer running here for the speakers, just so they're aware, so that we can stick to the 30 minutes allocated for this agenda item. Just to note, of course, this session will provide some information, some background on Canada's current approach to supporting First Nations self-determination on citizenship. And some of the topics include removing gender-based inequities that are part of the Indian Act. For example, Section 6.1, 6.2, and also the need to advance transformative change to support First Nations full self-determination over determining their own citizenship. So this is an introduction to a resolution that will be coming forward. We will not deal with the resolution right away, but once we start dealing with resolutions, there is something that will be presented, just so that you are aware. So with that, I'm going to call upon Willie Moore, Manitoba Regional Chief, Vice Chief for the Assembly of First Nations.
Hello, Dancer. Acknowledge, shake hands, each and every one of you. Like the Mr. Chairman Adam Fielder said, my name is Willie Moore, the Manitoba AFN Regional Chief, proud member of the Nissassawsi Cree Nation, Manitoba Treaty 5. So we're here to discuss the important topic of First Nation citizenship. And I'm pleased to welcome you to the session on the First Nation citizenship and eliminating gender-based discrimination in the Indian Act. Naskumuno naskuma kagedo. Hoyamaga anak. Itat Tisak, Scott Tisak, Potatuskiak, and everybody else in the Assembly for joining us today with open hearts as we discuss these critical issues that deeply impact our communities, particularly our women and children. As we all know, the Indian Act imposed colonial policies that undermined our people and our nations, our traditional governance systems, and stripped First Nations of the ability to define our own membership, such as the second generation cutoff. Our people have long called for the inherent right to determine who our citizens are. It is inequitable that other First Nation groups in Canada can exercise this right, yet First Nations cannot. Any changes to the Indian Act must include proper consultation of First Nations. Canada cannot unilaterally decide the future of our people. It's important to discuss the topic of jurisdiction. Very important. Jurisdiction over citizenship is fundamental to self-determination and in addressing the historical harms of colonialism. It is unacceptable that discriminatory language and policies continue to impact First Nations women and children. All First Nations parents should have the right to transmit status to their children. First Nations must be empowered to define their membership, provide services, deliver programs to their citizens, the necessary funding to support these efforts. The plenary provides an opportunity to share updates on the progress toward increased jurisdiction over citizenship and membership, as well as the work that is still ahead. We'll hear from First Nations women who have been pivotal in the advocating to eliminate gender-based discrimination in the Indian Act. Again, I'd like to thank our panel, and they are going to discuss more and share with you the background, where we're at, the successes, the challenges, and where we need to be, and how we're going to get there, and who's going to do it. So, Natasha, at this time, with that, I turn it to Natasha Beattie. Natasha is the AFN Director of Rights and Governance, who will provide an overview of AFN's advocacy efforts and on citizenship. So, stump, Natasha. Clap, she likes that. Good?
Yeah, thank you. Chimagwech Regional Chief. Good afternoon. My name is Natasha Beattie. I am the Director of Rights and Governance here at the AFN and have the honor and privilege of supporting work regarding citizenship. Myself, I'm an Otter Clan, member of Beausoleil First Nation in Georgian Bay, Ontario. The rights and governance sector at the AFN leads work on citizenship and advocating for First Nations self-determination over this issue, at the same time while eliminating gender-based discrimination in the Indian Act. During today's presentation, I'll be walking you through a brief history of our ongoing advocacy work, as in addition to previous work undertaken by the AFN and First Nations. I do want to recognize the important work by First Nations women on this issue, including our AFN Women's Council and our guests we have today on the plenary session. Over the years, there have been attempts to improve some of the discriminatory elements in the Indian Act through various policy and legislative measures. AFN and First Nations have engaged in legislation, including Bill C-31 and Bill S-3. In 2017, Bill S-3 began to address sex-based inequities in registration by allowing descendants of First Nations women who lost status due to marrying non-status men to become eligible for registration. However, despite amendments to the Indian Act, gender-based discrimination against First Nations women and girls continues to this day. We know there needs to be further revisions and amendments made to the Indian Act to ensure that women and men and gender diverse individuals have equal rights to pass on their Indian status to their children. In 2019 and 2020, the AFN published a series of discussion papers on the need for First Nations to take jurisdiction over their citizenship. This includes guides such as establishing membership code supports for First Nations. We are troubled by the lack of progress to date on supporting First Nations jurisdiction and self-determination over their citizenship, and are supportive of ongoing and recent court challenges, including the Nicolifs plaintiffs, to use the courts to further assert our collective and shared rights. Any legislative solutions must explicitly respect First Nations' own approaches, must include adequate funding to support First Nations rights, and must ensure opportunities for us to engage as nation to nation with other individuals and organizations such as Inuit and Métis brothers and sisters. For years, First Nations have long voiced that control over citizenship is an inherent right, and this legislation, including legislation around the Indian Act, infringes on this right. We have recent resolutions, including one from July, brought forward calling for First Nations control over citizenship and calling for control over legislative measures, including consultation and cooperation. The AFN continues to advocate to Canada that there's an immediate need for funding so that adequate engagements with First Nations can take place regarding any changes made to the Indian Act. Neither ISK nor CERNAC, who have a mandate, have provided the necessary funding to First Nations to reassert control over their citizenship. We know that this is a primary concern for First Nations across Turtle Island. There will not be any status Indians left in Canada within the next several generations unless First Nations are able to have the tools to assert jurisdiction and move beyond the Indian Act. We have to assert our laws, our own jurisdiction, and move beyond this and this is a key for us as First Nations people. We know that we are self-determining nations. We have jurisdiction. We need to take control of where we are and where we need to go as peoples and as nations. Out of respect for treaties and the vision that our ancestors provided us, we want to work in partnership. First Nations will not accept a prescriptive and rushed process that doesn't respect our inherent treaty rights, title, and jurisdiction. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples provides somewhat of a roadmap for this transformation, and there are a number of relevant action plan measures that set the tone and direction for Canada to engage with First Nations on this work. I just want to briefly walk you through a few pieces of legislation, including Bill C-38 that's currently within Parliament. This bill seeks to remedy certain elements of historical disenfranchisement to enable individuals to transmit status to their direct descendants. There are some concerns with respect to Bill C-38, including that it does not address the need for the transformative change and full recognition of First Nations authority over citizenship. Furthermore, there are concerns with this existing Parliament's ability to pass legislation before a federal election. First Nations have voiced concerns that there has been inadequate consultation on Bill C-38 and any additional proposed amendments to the Indian Act. We haven't seen any ambition from Canada to further this work, despite commitments, as I referred to previously, with respect to the United Nations Declaration Action Plan. Decades of inaction have resulted in harm that continues to persist across generations. We know there is lateral violence. We know that there are many of our community members and citizens that wish to come home. Canada's failure to address these issues contravenes their commitments to gender equality, contravenes First Nations rights, and full and reparative measures are needed to repair past harms and prevent further discrimination under the Indian Act. With the removal of sex-based inequities, we expect that newly registered persons through Bill C-38 will be estimated to be over 256,000 additional First Nation citizens by 2041. Despite this, there is an estimated increase to the population. Canada has not provided adequate funding for First Nation governments to support increased costs with respect to service delivery. First Nations that wish to take control over their membership can also do so under Section 10 of the Indian Act or by negotiating self-governing agreements and modern treaties with Canada. Speaking a little bit about ISK's existing Indigenous advisory process, there have been concerns with respect to the pace and the substance of Bill C-38. As a result, Canada launched an Indigenous advisory process in late 2023 to bring together First Nations, regional and national organizations to provide guidance to ISK on how to consult and cooperate on issues such as the second generation cutoff. Currently, there is a second phase of the IAP, or the Indigenous advisory process, with an open call-out for proposals available to First Nations to conduct engagements and to identify potential solutions with respect to this work. We know that $10,000 does not even come close to the level of work needed for First Nations to take ownership over determining and developing their own solutions. The AFN continues to meet with the government, with ISK, to support First Nations engagement in reforming elements of the Indian Act, and in many areas to support First Nations rights over self-determination. I'll speak briefly on the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, recognizing our other plenary speakers will speak to this as well. For those that don't know, the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women recently released a report. A portion of that report was related to this issue of First Nations citizenship in Canada. The report identified many issues, including the second-generation cutoff, the lack of action to address enfranchisement of First Nations women, the legal provisions that Canada has that prevents First Nations women and their descendants from attaining reparations for the human rights violations contained within the Indian Act, as well as a lack of effective policies to ensure that unregistered First Nations women and girls can access programs and benefits. The committee provided recommendations including amending Section 6 of the Indian Act to fully remove the categories of S6.1 and 6.2 and any other legal provision that doesn't recognize the equal rights of men and women to transmit status to their children. Other recommendations include reviewing records to grant status to First Nations women and their descendants who were previously denied status and who are now eligible. There was also a recommendation to repeal all domestic legal provisions that deny access to reparations, as I mentioned, for First Nations women and their descendants. In terms of next steps, the AFN continues to monitor Bill C-38 and has called on the Government of Canada to provide adequate resources to all First Nations rights holders to engage. The AFN continues to advocate for the removal of gender-based discrimination in the Indian Act and the removal of the second-generation cutoff status with respect to the Indian Act. The AFN continues to work with Canada to implement United Nations Declaration Action Plan measures where there is a mandate related to citizenship and to provide adequate and sustainable funding for First Nations governments to support self-determination over their citizenship. We look forward to future conversations with respect to the resolution, and I'll turn it back to our co-chair, Shimagwech.
Thank you very much. Of course, Natasha Beatty with Assembly of First Nations. So next, as part of this presentation, we are going to go online on the Zoom platform. Joining us is Chief Marilyn Slett from Heiltsuk First Nation. Of course, Chief Slett is a part of the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. Chief Slett, go ahead.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon. I'm calling in from the Heiltsuk territory, and I'm really pleased to be here with all of you and with the panel here today. First, I also want to acknowledge the host nations, Anishinaabe and Algonquin territory. So my presentation will focus on sex discrimination in the Indian Act, First Nations self-determination over citizenship law, and our experience at the UN. And simply said, the existing ISK regulations is a pathway for impending legislation extinction of our First Nations bans and banned lists and people. So we attended the CEDA 89th session committee that took place in Geneva in October. And the CEDA committee reviewed Canada for its compliance with the Convention on Ending All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. The session included NGOs from civil society and ministerial representatives from Canada. And we need to note that there were no ministers that attended the session. UBCIC sent a delegation alongside the Indian Act Sex Discrimination Working Group. And the working group is an advocacy body of organizations, women experts, key plaintiffs from across Canada who convene in pursuit of full recognition of citizenship and human rights of First Nations women and their descendants who have been discriminated under the Indian Act for the repair of all its harms. And I want to acknowledge the good work and the dedicated work of the committee. Two principal opportunities to advocate included a 10-minute joint statement from Canadian NGOs and side meetings with the Indian Act Sex Discrimination Working Group and the CEDAW Committee. So what we brought forward collectively is we advocated on 4 principal issues that have disproportionately targeted First Nations women and their descendants. The first being removal of the second generation cutoff and two-parent rule, and replacement with a one-parent rule of transmission. We understand that some bands have expressed concerns about supporting expanding membership, and to address potential capacity and infrastructure constraints, we are calling on Canada to provide funding services and land bases to First Nations to support with increased membership. We also spoke on the removal of the bar to compensation for women and their descendants to receive reparations. Thirdly, service delivery standards to address long wait times and to ensure proactive campaign by IST to notify newly entitled individuals to access rights and entitlements. And lastly, restoration of band membership for women who lost it due to sex discrimination in the Indian Act. UBCIC also brought forward issues of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit Plus people that have been directly linked to sex discrimination in the Indian Act by the National Inquiry and the CEDAW Committee. And by UBCIC Resolution 2023-61, UBCIC advocated for First Nations self-determination over citizenship law. First Nations women have been at the forefront of citizenship advocacy for decades, and our calls for First Nations self-determination over citizenship law, as in the resolutions before you, it is crucial that they are not forgotten. The international human rights of women and their descendants must be upheld by the Crown and by First Nations alike. It is time for our women and children to be brought home to the heart of our cultures and communities. Just to share really briefly, Helsik has been on the self-determination journey spanning many generations, and this has included external work such as negotiating different agreements with the Crown and internally developing our Helsik Constitution. Our Constitution will create the mechanism for transitioning away from the Indian Act and its oppressive nature of status under the Act, and provide that space to determine citizenship, a space previously occupied by the Canadian government via the Indian Act, and reclaiming our ways of belonging outside the Indian Act and aligning with our laws, and we call them Gwe laws. So in concluding with the CEDAW observations, CEDAW committee published its concluding observations last month, which directly reflect the Indian Act Sex Discrimination Working Group recommendation as outlined. And the committee called on Canada to overhaul the Indian Act to remove discrimination against women and their children, remedying the second generation cutoff, the bar to compensation, and supporting bands with increased membership. Our work is now to hold Canada accountable to the committee's recommendations. And certainly discrimination is something that all of our communities know. My family knows this firsthand. My grandchildren are both discriminated against Canada. And, we know this, with the work that we've been doing, that, the Act as it is today will be a pathway to legislative extinction of our communities. So I strongly encourage you to access the community-specific data sheets through ISK's website, so you know the exact numbers of the 6.1 and 6.2 status members of your community. And the results can be drawn and demonstrate the urgency of these issues and the legislated extinction that our nations are now facing. And Gayaksika, I want to thank you for the time here today.
Miigwech, thank you very much. Chief Marilyn Slett joining us on Zoom. So the final speaker on this topic, I'd like to invite Shannon Metabim to the podium. Of course, Sharon was instrumental in a lot of the changes and the work that happened with Bill C-31. So with that, we have about 5 minutes for Shannon Metabim.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. I think I made my first appearance at an AFN conference maybe 1992. And so it's great to be back. I've been before. I'm here to talk a little bit about the work that I've been doing. Thinking about it, I think I did my first act of civil disobedience in July of 1968. So I think a lot of you weren't alive at that time. Anyway, I've done a lot of work on the Indian Act. Most of you would know about the McIver case, and probably a lot of you have been affected by the McIver case. That was a case that was brought against the Department of Indian Affairs after Bill C-31. They left a lot of discrimination in the Indian Act, and I've been working on that ever since. The United Nations and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and the International Human Rights Watch are three international organizations that I've been involved with, looking at primarily the ongoing discrimination in the Indian Act. The UN CEDAW Committee, Human Rights Committee, and the International Human Rights Commission have declared that the Indian Act is a genocide document. It says that they've also declared that the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is an indirect cause of the ongoing discrimination in the Indian Act. Appeared before those committees on several occasions, brought the issue forward, and my colleagues have told you what the last CEDAW committee said, and we're continuing on that. The thing that hasn't been brought out is in 2019 we had legislation passed that allowed, they estimated about 250,000 more descendants, mainly of women who had been discriminated against, to allow them to have status. What they haven't done is informed the population. They didn't put out any declaration that they declared that anybody born before April the 17th, 1985, a descendant from one of the women that had been married out, would have full status. That has not been put out there. There are a lot of people that are entitled to status today, and they don't know. The Department of Indian Affairs doesn't tell them. You make an application to the department to get status, and you'll get a letter that says it may take up to 2 years, depending on it. And it's a shame that you can get a Canadian passport in 2 weeks if you want to, but you cannot get even your application for Indian status looked at for close to 2 years. So that's something that's ongoing, and we should be outraged about it. The second generation cutoff, of course, has been talked about. We've been pushing that ever since June of 1985. That's when the Bill C-31 was declared law, and that it's a termination document. In 3 to 4 generations, there will be no status Indians left if we don't do anything about it. Stuart Clatworthy, a demographer, in my case in 2006 or shortly thereafter, said that there will be a band in Manitoba that will have its last status Indian born around 2030, which is 5 years from now. And we've had the influx because looking forward. I did a lot of work for my grandchildren. I have 3 great-grandchildren, and that's already kicked in for me. My grandchildren are not eligible for status. So my line will be gone when I'm gone and my grandchildren are gone. My great-grandchildren cannot pass, or my grandchildren could not pass it on. There's a lot of things I wanted to talk to you about, but 5 minutes isn't very long. But the last thing I wanted to say is that the legislation says that we as Indian women cannot sue for compensation, and everybody else has. The sled dogs that were killed, the Inuit sled dogs that were killed, have compensation, but we as Indigenous women cannot apply or get compensation. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much for the presentation. To wrap up this portion of the agenda, I'll turn it back to Regional Chief Willie Moore. So I'm going to turn it over to Regional Chief Willie Moore. And I know they were right here. And then we have a question online, so I'm going to go online after that. You okay?
Yep. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Natasha, for the brief. I know it's a brief summary, but there's going to be a resolution on the topic of the First Nations citizenship. And it's going to be entertained on the tomorrow or the third day, and I believe there's going to be discussion on it as well. Very, very important topic within our executive, and a very important file. And I'd like to thank the technicians and the staff that they, doing that very important work. So I want to give a shout out to my Manitoba chiefs, giving me the opportunity to be your regional chief, the Nasco one. And I've been there 4 months for the assembly. I've just been recently elected in July. And I'll give a shout out to my colleague from Quebec, Ghislaine. He's been there 33 years and 2 months, so I got a lot of catching up to do. Let's give Ghislaine a round of applause. 33 years is a long time. I know our colleague and Regional Chief Andrea Paul they honored her Atlantic Chiefs that were there for 30 plus years. I want to give my colleague a shout out. So again, there'll be discussion on that when the resolution is entertained by the chair in the Resolutions Committee. So there'll be a lot of good discussion on the topic of First Nation citizenship. So thank you. So look forward to the rest of the discussion in the day. Dr. Adam.
Miigwech, Regional Chief Willie Moore from Manitoba. So that concludes the presentations. Again, we will be dealing with this issue in resolutions. There is a resolution coming forward dealing with this. And if there are discussions or questions, there will be that opportunity. But I am looking online. There is a hand that was raised. If it is a question dealing with this issue, of course, there is that chance when we are dealing with resolutions. So I'm just going to check online. I think the hand went down. The hand is still there, so it's the same as a chief at the microphone. I believe it's Chief Fred Robbins. If we can have Chief Robbins unmuted, please. If it is a question, we can deal with it at resolutions, but I'll turn it over to Chief Robbins on Zoom. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I don't need 3 minutes. My comment is just around the when we are talking about discrimination of First Nations women, we also have to think about the male's role in all of this. When a First Nations man married a non-Indigenous, the non-Indigenous got their status. And when they got their status, shortly after, sometimes they divorced, and their children still continued to receive status, even though they weren't even considered First Nations. But the lady received the status. I just wanted to make mention of that as well, that when we're talking about status First Nations in Canada, that we also have to take into consideration how many non-status are receiving benefits. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Miigwech, Chief Robbins, for those comments. So with that concludes the presentation, and I will turn it over to my colleague Cedric to get into resolutions.
So thank you, Adam. Thank you to all our panels. And as Adam mentioned, we are now going to be getting into the resolutions process. So just in case, I'm going to say it another time, there is a Wi-Fi for this assembly. It's 2024 SCA AFN, something like that. and the password is assembly, all lowercase. So if ever you guys haven't signed up or having connectivity issues, you can use that. Welcome, Bram. Before we continue, also, according to the rules and procedures, so the point on quorum, 24A, we say that on each day of the Assembly, a count will be conducted of chiefs and proxy representatives present on the floor of the Assembly room, including those who are present in the designated virtual Assembly room, when the chair calls the meeting to order. So the count this morning, again, when we called to order at 9:34, gave us a total of 147 chiefs that were present at that moment. Quorum is defined as 50 plus 1, 50% plus 1. So for quorum, for today's resolutions, we have 75. Tomorrow, another count will be done when we call to order. So again, inviting you to be there nice and early. As per the rules and procedures also, and as mentioned earlier, we will be starting with draft emergency resolution number 1. It was distributed by our team prior to lunch. So in that sense, I will only read the modifications that have happened since and the therefore be it resolved, just to be conscious of our time. So if we can have the resolution set on the screens, please. So we have draft emergency resolution number 1, 2024, titled Call for a National Inquiry into Systemic Racism in Policing and First Nations People's Death. Is our mover, Chief Alan Polchis, here? I heard yes. Is our seconder, Chief Jerry Jack, here? Chief Jack, thank you. I see you. So we will now move on to the whereas H. I see that there was an addition since it was just distributed. Just to make sure that it's in the record, we will be going through whereas H. If I can have our technical team scroll down slowly. Very slowly. It's giving you guys more time to get access to the voting platform. So we have the addition here in red, so I will read it into the record. Whereas H, the investigations into the recent deaths of First Nations people after interacting with police are being conducted in isolation of each other, which is not drawing conclusions as one interrelated epidemic. The addition, furthermore, oftentimes the individual conducting an investigation is a current or former police officer. This leads to the consequent situation where the investigator is biased, whether they recognize it or not, has them already sided with the officers with a cultural attitude to toe the blue line. And therefore be it resolved. We have therefore be it resolved that the First Nations in Assembly 1 call upon the Government of Canada to convene a national inquiry into systemic racism in policing, whose mandate would include investigation of police-related deaths of First Nations people, serious injury, and allegations of sexual assault, and other serious incidents between police and First Nations people, with the objective to make concrete and specific recommendations to end discrimination and racism in policing. 2, call upon the Government of Canada to ensure that the National Inquiry into Systemic Racism in Policing include a First Nations Chief Commissioner and Commissioners, plural, to ensure First Nations perspectives are guiding the work of the inquiry and that the approach be a culturally sensitive and trauma-informed process respectful of First Nations. 3, direct the Assembly of First Nations, AFN, to advocate for national inquiry into systemic racism in policing and call for implementation of police reform measures, including A, data collection, consistent with Indigenous data sovereignty principles that will inform policies to address systemic racism. B, demilitarization of police forces and a cap on tactical deployments and use of lethal force. C, establishment of a national crisis intervention team across Canada to provide a specialized and trained response to people in crisis 24 hours per day. And D, that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, provincial police, and municipal police to immediately implement the remaining 5 of the 8 can't wait policies. Subpoint I, mandatory training for officers on de-escalation and harm reduction techniques. If we can scroll down. Subpoint II, a ban on the use of chokeholds and extreme restraint techniques, including neon neck restraint. 3, a ban on shooting at vehicles. IV, requirements for police officers to give verbal warnings, and V, requirements for a use of force continuum, requiring that the use of force match the circumstances. Subpoint E, immediately after a serious incident has occurred involving a First Nations person, that the incident investigation includes a First Nations person who has been trained to assist the investigation, and F, requirements for federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal police forces to institute operational policy that requires an independent First Nations police investigator to assist with cases involving the deaths of First Nations people by police. And finally, therefore be it resolved 4, direct the AFN to advocate that the national inquiry into systemic racism in policing be provided a clear mandate, provide targeted, tangible recommendations that will be immediately implemented by the federal, provincial, and territorial governments in collaboration with First Nations. So now we have read the resolution to the record, and I would go towards our mover, Chief Alan Polchis, for opening comments. Chief Polchis, on microphone number 1, please. Chief Polchis, you'll have 4 minutes.
Quay. Good afternoon, everyone. As we all know, this is a very, very sensitive and important file for all of our people across Turtle Island. You know, in my own home province, in New Brunswick, systemic racism is at its forefront. We've asked for an inquiry on the murder of Chantal Moore. That was just one of them. Rodney Levi, and many others. Of course, we had a government that, of course, didn't want to do that. Because, again, we fall into systemic racism. And to have a national inquiry, to call for a national inquiry, is something that, of course, will give all of our citizens some answers. Being safe in a safe space in our own land, we should feel safe. We shouldn't be threatened or afraid of police, folks that are in authority. So I move this motion to ask for a national inquiry and this resolution so that we can, of course, get answers in reference to the resolution that is on hand. Willie Wood.
Thank you, Chief Polchis. I will now look towards our seconder for opening comments.
Gail Kessler, Clark O'Gala. I come from Much First Nation on the west coast of Vancouver Island. Nation is live in Gold River, and my English name is Jerry Jack. I'm one of the hereditary chiefs from Muchlet. I can proudly stand here and say I'm not an Indian Act chief, because I'm not. I wasn't elected into this chieftainship that I have, and I fully support what my friend Mr. Polchis is talking about, because I am very closely related to Miss Moore that he's talking about. Come from the west coast of Vancouver Island, and I'm a retired police officer myself. I spent 21 years in law enforcement, and I get ashamed that I was part of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police when I hear stories like this, because that's part of my family. I look at them as family, and I'm ashamed that I was there, but I did. You know, and I was a victim on both sides. When I was stationed in Ucluelet back in 1996-7, I got a commissioner's commendation because I didn't shoot a First Nations person. I could have shot him. And a few years later, I was a victim of police violence in Victoria. I got beat up pretty good for no reason, just because I was walking back to my hotel. That's a long story, but I won't go there. But I just have to add a few amendments, Mr. Chair. Add a new number 3. And it is call upon the Government of Canada to immediately establish with the Assembly of First Nations, AFN, a national task force to end police-related deaths and other serious incidents between police and First Nations. And then add a number 6, please, Mr. Chair. Direct the AFN to seek funding and convene a national forum on systemic racism in policing to highlight First Nations experiences as they relate to racism and police to identify future actions and immediate next steps. Those are the 2 that I'd like to add in there, Mr. Chair.
Perfect.
And like I said, I speak in favor of this motion, and I hope we get support, because the reason why I left the RCMP is because of the racism that I felt from my co-workers and my detachment commanders. Not all of them were like that, but there was some really bad ones. Thank you for your time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chief Jack. So to make sure that the team, and again, as you see, we do have Resolutions Committee members next to the microphone. So if you have the wording, thank you for having given it to them. We have the addition of a new, therefore be resolved 3, which would be call upon the Government of Canada to immediately establish with the Assembly of First Nations a national task force to end police-related deaths and other serious incidents between police and First Nations. That is the wording. Perfect. So I will look towards our mover. I'm getting a thumbs up from our mover. And the second amendment that was proposed was the addition of a final, therefore be it resolved, which would be 6. Direct the AFN to seek funding and convene a national forum on systemic racism in policing to highlight First Nations experiences as they relate to racism and the police, and to identify future actions and immediate next steps. Is the wording confirmed? Confirmed by 2. And I look towards our mover. Chief Polcheese, are you okay with the addition? I get another thumbs up. Thank you very much. We will now go towards discussion, and the process will be as has been tradition here. Microphone 1, microphone 2, and then we will look towards our Zoom platform. If ever you want to speak first, that is the process that we will follow as long as we keep the speakers list open. And as mentioned, we also have a Resolutions Committee, so if there's specific wording that you have, please ensure that the Resolutions Committee has it. There's no one on microphone 1, so I will go towards microphone 2. If you can give your name and community.
Good afternoon, Chair. My name is Anna Nedhe, and I am the proxy for Martin Falls First Nation. I was hoping you could pull up that one section where it's in the therefore, where it's requesting that it says the Canadian RCMP municipal policing as well.
That would be therefore be resolved now for D. If we can.
Yeah, because I don't have a copy of the resolution, but I was trying to read it quickly as you were going over it. But does it include First Nation policing services? Because we need to ensure that they too are included so that they have the capacity to implement.
So the proposed wording would then be to add in that, therefore be it resolved, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Provincial Police, Municipal Police, and First Nations Police.
Yes.
Okay with the wording?
Thank you.
Thank you. So I will look towards our mover. So it's in therefore be it resolved now would be for D, adding and First Nations Police to the list of different police forces. I'm getting a thumbs up from Chief Polcheese. Thank you. I look towards our seconder, Chief Jack. Thumbs up too. Thank you very much. I'm looking online, seeing no one. Again, use the raise hand function if you do want to address the assembly. So I will return to microphone number 1. If you can tell us your name and community.
Cookby Helen Henderson, Rentsquest, Chikeskan First Nation. Hello everyone, my name is Chief Helen Henderson from Chikeskan First Nation, formerly known as Canam Lake Band. Certainly new to this resolution process. Please forgive me, bear with me. Working with my technician on moving forward. Some of the comments around that we have certainly clarify the urgency, expand the necessity of immediate action, highlight the ongoing harm caused by systemic racism in policing and its disproportionate impact on First Nations communities. For example, emphasize how the deaths listed in the resolution are part of a broader preventable crisis. Example of some wording, the deaths of First Nations people at the hands of RCMP, provincial and municipal police are not isolated incidents. They represent a systemic failure to protect the lives and dignity of Indigenous peoples in Canada. Without immediate action, more lives will be lost and the trust in law enforcement will continue to erode. And I have three or four more points like this just to talk about the resolution, but I did forward this to the Resolutions Committee to try to incorporate or just give our thoughts. Strengthen the calls for accountability, include language requiring regular, transparent reporting from the National Inquiry and the RCMP. This ensures accountability beyond the initial inquiry process. 3, broaden recommendations for reform. The proposed measures such as implementing it can't wait policies are valuable, but could be expanded to address broader systemic issues in policing. Diversifying police forces by mandating hiring targets for Indigenous officers, establishing independent oversight bodies for police misconduct staffed by Indigenous representatives, increasing investment in First Nations-led public safety and community wellness programs. Enhance cultural sensitivity and trauma-informed practices, explicitly require that police reforms include mandatory cultural competency training developed and delivered by First Nations communities. Example, mandate that all law enforcement personnel participate in comprehensive, ongoing, culturally competent and trauma-informed training programs developed and delivered in partnership with First Nations organizations. Emphasize the role of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Provide specific metrics for success. Humanize the issue. Integrate the stories of individuals affected by systemic racism in policing to make the resolution more impactful and relatable.
Kirkby Henderson.
Thank you.
We've come to your 3 minutes. If I can ask, if you have specific wording that you'd like to include, we have one of our Resolutions Committee members here just to your right.
Absolutely.
With a computer. If you can give that wording to them, and we'll see where we can fit it in.
It's already shared, and I just wanted to share with the room for sure.
Is there specific amendment you'd like to propose?
No, I just wanted, it's generally overall the resolution, and I shared that with the Resolutions Committee already for consideration by the mover and seconder, Cook's-Jem.
Thank you very much. Microphone number 2, please.
Aitsquil and the Paitsep Yapota Quilchasauce. I am Katisha Paul. I am proxy for Chief Don Tom in Sartlet, BC. I am also the Union of BC Indian Chiefs Youth Representative and holding space for the Youth Representative of BC AFN. Thank you all chiefs for having me here, and I appreciate the people of this land. I want to add a friendly amendment to 4C, reading implementation of independent First Nations oversight, access, and accountability over data recorded by body-worn cameras. We have to ensure that there's further transparency and accountability and ensure that we are practicing our inherent right to data, Indigenous data sovereignty. Thank you so much, and looking to you, Chair, for those amendments.
Perfect. Thank you, Proxy Paul. And we'll be looking towards the Resolutions Committee. Was the language shared with them prior? Perfect. So I'll just wait for it to be updated here. So what I understood is that we have in, therefore be resolved 4, the addition of a subpoint, which would say implementation of independent First Nations oversight, access, and accountability over data recorded by body-worn cameras. Is the language correct? Perfect, thank you. So I would look towards our mover for the addition again of implementation of independent First Nations oversight, access, and accountability over data recorded by body-worn cameras. Chief Paltsy's thumbs up. Chief Jack, thumbs up. Thank you, Proxy Paul. Looking towards online, I see that we have Chief Justin Kane. If we can have Chief Kane's video pulled up and unmuted, please. Chief Kane, we should be able to hear you.
Good afternoon. Just expressing concern with adding First Nation police to the resolution. In Statling, we have the Statling Tribal Police Services, and it's a program. So we aren't, as we all know, that there is an essential services funding for these First Nations police services, and I'm having a hard time to understand that the AFN is trying to give direction to our nation in regards to things that we need to do with our police services.
And Chief Kane, just to make sure, are you asking for the withdrawal of and First Nations police, or is it just a comment to the Assembly? So you're asking for the withdrawal of and First Nations police?
Yes.
Perfect. So I will look towards our mover to undo the amendment that was accepted. And this would be and therefore be resolved 4.now E. And thank you, technicians. And again, this would return us to the original language of RCMP, provincial police, and municipal police. Chief Volchis, if I can have microphone 1 open, please.
We're going to remove it, right? Yes, we're fine with removing that.
So we're removing First Nations police?
Yes.
Right. I would look towards our seconder. It's okay with that? So we will return to the original language of Royal Canadian Mounted Police, provincial police, and municipal police. Thank you, Chief Volchis. I will look towards further discussion. Chief Volchis, did you want to add additional things, or are you okay for now? Okay. So I'll go to microphone number 2, please. You should be good now.
Yes. Vice Chief Joseph Tassani with the Prince Albert Grand Council. I'd like to give proxy for Hatchet Lake Dennis Wilkin First Nation an opportunity to grant Chief Hardlot with PAGC to speak on the following.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I acknowledge all the chiefs present here this afternoon in this assembly. I acknowledge our Creator. Since we're acknowledging the part of a police agencies, we like to make a add-on to that. And we're from Saskatchewan region, province Saskatchewan. And there's going to be another police force coming to be in our province. And they refer to them as a Saskatchewan Marshal Service. They're not there yet. They'll be, but they'll be there. I'm not sure, but it's a police force created by the province. So we want to include that on there. But also, in our region, in our province, we had what they call provincial conservation officers. Nedhe. They only used to do the part of enforcing their main job is enforcing the Wildlife Act, but they have the powers of a police officer now. So they really harass our people. They can stop anybody, by speeding, but they really target our hunters. So they have those powers. They're under correction services in the province of Saskatchewan. So if we can add those on to this resolution, kinanashkumit na, tinigit na. Merci, Joe. Medabia.
Perfect. So thank you. So I just want to confirm, again, I believe this would fall under 4E. Again, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Provincial Police, Municipal Police. We would add marshals and conservation
officers, provincial conservation officers.
Yeah. So I'll look towards our resolutions committee. Again, so we have the addition of marshals and conservation officers to immediately implement. Chief Paul Cheese, thumbs up. Chief Jack, thumbs up. Thank you. We have a hand up on our Zoom, so if I could have Chief Fred Robbins put on screen and unmuted, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To introduce myself, my name is Fred Robbins. I'm the elected chief of the people of the White Earth, the northwest corner of the Secwepemc Nation in BC. Just a couple of comments around this whole resolution, and the justice system itself is flawed. Time and time again, police get away with hand slapping, being transferred to another department, which just moves the problem to another location. It'd be nice to see, once they've been properly processed through their own laws and their own systems, that the First Nations also have an opportunity. I really think that if their discrimination and racism is that high and it's been proven in their own courts, why is it they're being transferred to another department, or they're still being hired as specifically to other federal or provincial positions? It doesn't make sense to me. I think if they've been charged with some of these heinous crimes, they should lose all opportunities to work for any province or federal government, rather than just being transferred from one department to another. It's a concern for me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chief Robbins, for your comments. And I think we'll close the speakers list now, seeing that most are. So we'll return to microphone number 1, please.
Chief Kelsey Jocko from Cold Lake First Nation. Since everybody's adding stuff here, I want to add sheriffs and peace officers to number E, if that's possible, from Alberta, because the province is run by RCMPs and now sheriffs. So I just want to give my input.
So sheriffs and peace officers. So again, in 4E, we're looking to add sheriffs and peace officers. Thumbs up from Chief, and thumbs up from Chief. And our final speaker, microphone number 2, please.
Thank you. My name is Anna Betty Achnibanashkam, and I'm representing Martin Falls First Nation. First of all, I want to acknowledge the reason as to why this resolution is on the floor. My condolences to all of us who have lost family members through police involvement. The reason why I had wanted to add First Nation policing services is that, we are in a position now where we are wanting to transform and also implement our own policing services within our First Nation. And I applaud everyone who is doing that. So, I believe that these policing services, because I know right now under the legislation they are programs, but we are advocating for it to transfer into an essential service to be recognized as a police service. So, which means that we need to secure and acquire adequate and equal capacity and also accountability. So therefore, that is why I had requested that friendly amendment, but I will certainly support what the mover and seconder agree to. Language.
Thank you, Proxy. As I had already closed the speakers list, you expected it, we will be moving towards the vote. And again, this will be through the online platform. So if I can have our technicians pull up the screen with the vote. And open the vote for draft emergency resolution number 1 as amended, call for a national inquiry into systemic racism in policing and First Nations people's death. So I see that the voting has been opened. You should have access to it again on the top of your screen. And just maybe a quick word on that. Once resolutions are finished, they will go to the bottom list. So those are the ones that we voted on today. The one that is open will always be on top to help you find it. We do have our distribution team also. If ever there are issues, just raise your hand and our distribution team will be able to come see you. If I could also ask our technicians to refresh the page, please. Thank you. Chief King, I see you at microphone 1. Are you having issues with your voting platform? If we can open microphone 1, please.
Hello. Oh, it works. Okay. Chief Wilfred King, Kiasagi, Nishnabek, Gulby First Nation. Mr. Chair, just has a, I don't know if it's a commentary or not, or how is this electronic voting any faster? It seems to me you would have had the results of your vote already with a hands up and a hands down. I haven't, now I just got it now. It took about 2 to 3 minutes to get the ballot question. So how is this process any faster than a hands up and a hands down? Thank you.
Thank you, Chief King. Again, growing pains. This is our first official resolution that we've had with this platform. We'll continue working on improving it. But thank you for comments, and I do agree. But we're going to work through the process and make sure that we can, again, offer these voices to everyone. I believe we'll give another 20 to 30 seconds. I've been told to wait. So if ever anyone is having issues, we do have our distribution team with blue lanyards that are here around and about to help you with the process. And this is on draft emergency resolution number 1, call for national inquiry into systemic racism in policing and First Nations people's death as amended. And I just want to remind you guys, you have to confirm your vote. So it will have a pop-up say, are you sure this is what you want to vote for? Make sure that it's the right thing, and then select that. I'll look around the room. So maybe another 5-10 seconds. Again, we'll maybe shorten the times as we get there, but being this is the first, we're trying to let space be open. Comment on microphone number 1, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Tammy Cook-Searson, and I'm the chief of Black Larange Indian Band. I've had my hand up since you said to put our hands up to get help, and I haven't had help yet, so I'm not sure who you have helping to vote.
Perfect. Distribution will be right with you. I see
Thank you.
our team is getting up. We have another raised hand here, I believe, next to microphone number 2.
Yeah, Chief Kelsey Jacko again. Some of us still go to old school or whatnot. I was told there's special lanyards for people to vote, so that wasn't really explained to the audience.
There's not special lanyards to vote. It's
like if you don't, like the old school, nobody's all computer, whatever, phone, whatever, illiterate. But isn't there like some special lanyards if people are just set in old ways and not room for change? I was just told there's a special lanyard for people to vote on that.
Okay. Thank you for my microphone too. So again, we're moving away from that. We're trying to modernize the process. First time, there will be growing pains for sure. There are not any special lanyards. We do have the team with the blue lanyards that will be around. Again, if anyone does have issues, raise your hand high so that we can see them, just to make sure. We have a few hands up. And I'll remind you guys, girls and cousins, that the password for the Wi-Fi is assembly, all in lowercase, if ever there are connection issues. We'll give a few seconds to our resolutions team. I'm seeing votes being added in still. And again, we've had much more votes than quorum, so I just want to say that. Final call. Anyone who's having issues, this is the first vote. If there is issues, let's raise our hands and we'll get our distribution team over to you. And this also includes our friends who are on Zoom. The number hasn't moved. If we can have one final refresh maybe from our technical team, just to make sure. And if I can have the votes, thank you. So the number hasn't moved in a few minutes, so I will ask our technical team to close the voting. If we can have the voting closed, please. So, emergency resolution 1. We have, and this is the reason we do this, we do have 2 abstentions, with every other vote being for or in support. So, draft emergency resolution number 1, as amended, call for a national inquiry into systemic racism in policing and First Nations people's death is adopted. Omnibus. We will be proceeding with more. We have, funnily enough, an omnibus, or microphone 1, please, before we proceed.
Good afternoon, Chief Wilfred King, Kiasagin, Gulby First Nation. Mr. Chair, that took about 5 minutes in total to get, when you first made the announcement to the, I don't think we have the results yet even, but a resolution like that probably could have took us maybe a minute at the most. So I know we're looking at expediency, but just for observation, And my understanding is that if you just click on your last resolution or the last resolution, it's quicker. Is that true, or is that, that was never explained. I just keep scrolling up to the new email that comes in. I'm not sure which way is faster, but my friend behind me said it's quicker if you go to the last resolution.
So the way the process works is you will receive an email every time, but if you keep that web page open, it will refresh and you will have the active resolution on top.
Okay, miigwech.
Once that resolution is adopted or defeated, we will then send it to the bottom in your list of resolutions that have already passed, and the new one will appear at the top once voting is open. It only appears once voting is open, and that might be one of the situations. Comment on microphone number 1.
Hello, Deputy Chief Calvin Charlie for Little Simon Comorax First Nation. This is just a request for transparency to see the vote numbers after the vote is done.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Dick. If we can have, we do have a resume of the voting results. So, technical team. So again, technical team, if you can have the results put up on screen. Again, the way our voting works, abstentions are not included in the final count. So again, it was adopted by consensus. Thank you, technical staff. We will now be moving on to our next resolutions, or I have a point on microphone number 2. Microphone number 2, please.
Did you have the, Grand Chief Cody Daibo from Ganawalge, the actual number? Because I just seen 100% of the actual number of how many partook.
Those should be available. I'll look towards our technical team if they can have that chart set up. I think there's also a table, possibly. Thank you, Grand Chief. We'll give time to our, again, adopted by consensus. So as the team works to get that set up, I'll still head towards our next point, which is Omnibus number 1 for infrastructure and economic development. We have 4 resolutions within this omnibus. We have Draft Resolution 5, 2024, First Nations Labor Market Information. We have Draft Resolution 6, First Nations Economic Reconciliation Framework. We have Draft Resolution 7, recognize the FMCC network of professionals for the support of First Nations telecommunications. And Draft Resolution 8, right to the improvement of housing, social condition. Before we get into reading it, I've been informed we do have hands raised on Zoom. So if you can go to Chief Fred Robbins on Zoom, please.
Yeah, I didn't even get to vote. The links weren't sent to me. So I'm pretty sure you're not at 100% about I didn't get to vote. So there's something going on with the system here if I never received the link.
Perfect. Thank you, Chief Robbins. We'll have one of the team who is in the Zoom call communicate with you to make sure that you do get that link. It was a link you would have received from AFN meetings. So if ever that can help you in searching in your email for that link. And we have Chief Lee Span from Coldwater on Zoom, if we can have his microphone open. Chief Span?
Why,
Antla, Yarik Shinwanwan, and Jawa and Squash, Lispa Hancock, Bevan Selectcook, Inlikup Nation, BC Interior. Hello and good morning, everyone. Lispa Han Chief Co-Order Band here in the interior of British Columbia. Just a quick question because I didn't see the emergency resolution 01 in the package that was sent out, and if there's going to be any other emergency resolutions, when will they be sent out to the chiefs online? Because trying to look for it in any of the emails that we received from the AFN, we couldn't find anything. So trying to follow along in the process and keeping up to what is being said and what is being amended. So would appreciate if all the information that is being talked about be sent out to the chiefs that are not in attendance. Just a recommendation from myself. Thank you for giving me the time to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Span. And I was informed that the resolutions were sent through the Zoom platform. So if you open the chat box, you should have access to all of those. They were sent at the beginning of the afternoon. But again, we'll look with our distribution team maybe to make sure that an email blast is also sent out for any other updated resolutions in that sense. I'll go back to our technical team. Is there a possibility to have the table of results posted? I'm getting a nod, so we'll work on that with our team. Again, right now, this one was 100%, but we'll look towards the team to see how we can get that updated. Nope. If we keep going with Omnibus number 1, we had 4 resolutions that were named already. We have draft resolution 5, 6, 7, and 8, who are going to be moved by Chief David Munoz. Is Chief Munoz with us in the room? Chief here. And seconded by Alan Polchees. Chief Polchees, right here. We will read the therefore be it resolves into the record. So for draft resolution 5, First Nations labor market information, therefore be it resolved. Call on Employment and Social Development Canada, ESDC, to provide long-term transfer agreement funding for the Indigenous Labor Market Information, ILMI, Survey and Skills Inventory Initiative, making it a permanent component by April 1st, 2026. For First Nations Indigenous Skills and Employment Training, ISET, agreement holders. If we can have the technicians also scroll down to the therefore be it resolved, please. 2, call on ESDC to work with the First Nations ISET agreement holders, the Assembly of First Nations, AFN, the Chiefs Committee on Human Resource Development, and the Chiefs Committee on Economic Development to work towards the goal, long-term transfer funding for First Nation ISET agreement holders. 3, direct the AFN to support the establishment of a technical working group comprising First Nation ISET agreement holders to A, develop a First Nations labor market information initiative business case to assist in the advocacy in establishing the ILMI initiative as a permanent component with the ISET agreement holders and its delivery. B, work with ESDC in addressing data collection shortfalls and the rising costs associated with the providing related delivery capacity. And therefore be resolved 4, direct the AFN to assign a dedicated staff lead subject to appropriate and available resources on the ILMI survey and skill inventory file to ensure regular updates toward the desired goal of permanent transfer funding is made to First Nation ISET agreement holders. We have draft resolution number 6, First Nations Economic Reconciliation Framework. If we can have that put up on screen, draft resolution 6, and scroll down to therefore be it resolved. Thank you. Therefore be it resolved that the First Nations and Assembly 1, call on Canada to ensure that the development of an Indigenous Economic Reconciliation Framework prioritizes the unique needs, aspirations, and priorities of First Nations right holders and aligns with First Nations inherent and treaty rights. If the technicians can scroll down to the therefore be it resolved. First Nations inherent and treaty rights, title and jurisdiction related to their lands, economies, and citizens. 2, call on Canada to ensure that the Economic Reconciliation Framework commits to concrete actions to enable First Nations and their economies to thrive, reflective of the need for First Nations access to lands, waters, capital, and as well as social, governance, and institutional supports. 3, call on Canada, provinces, and territories to recognize First Nations as equal partners in discussions and decision-making on policy reform and renewal with meaningful authority over policy outcome that impact their economies. 4, call on Canada to provide necessary resources to First Nations to support the development and implementation of the Economic Reconciliation Framework that reflects First Nations' inherent and treaty rights, title, and jurisdiction. 5, direct the Assembly of First Nations, AFN, to urge First Nations economic development organizations and institutions to provide robust technical support to First Nations right holders in the identification and creation of economic reconciliation priorities and initiatives, and to support the primary role of First Nations right holders in this work. 6, direct the AFN Chiefs Committee on Economic Development to provide recommendations and guidance to the AFN to support this work. If we can move on to draft resolution number 7, recognize the First Mile Connectivity Consortium as a network of professionals for the support of First Nations telecommunication, and scroll down to the therefore be it resolved, please, technicians. Therefore be it resolved that the First Nations in Assembly call upon the Government of Canada to meet its commitment to connecting all Canadians to high-speed internet by 2030. With a priority on underserviced Indigenous communities by connecting 100% of users on First Nations communities. This includes supporting First Nations access to electromagnetic spectrum and the development and ongoing operations of First Nations owned and operated telecommunications infrastructure and services. 2, direct the Assembly of First Nations, AFN, to recognize telecommunications as a priority and access to digital services as a right, and to include a separate budget and development plan specific to First Nations telecommunications in its pre-budget consultation briefs. 3, recognize the First Mile Connectivity Consortium as a network of professionals that supports First Nations in the development of First Nations internet service providers and supports the ability of First Nations to build and operate their own telecommunication and connectivity infrastructure and services. And 4, direct the AFN to explore collaboration with the FMCC to bring the voices and experience of First Nations to inform telecommunications policy on a range of issues, including ongoing support for First Nations-owned and operated telecommunications infrastructure and services, extending 911 services, improving network resiliency and reliability, providing roaming agreements, and accessing the spectrum, including through spectrum licensing processes. And our final draft resolution in this omnibus, draft resolution number 8, right to the improvement of housing, a social condition. If we can have it set up and scroll down to the therefore be it resolved. Therefore be it resolved that the First Nations in Assembly direct the Assembly of First Nations, AFN, to urge the federal government to close the First Nations infrastructure gap and invest $14.493 billion for on-reserve housing for Manitoba First Nations. 2, direct the AFN to urge the federal government to collaborate directly with the Manitoba First Nations and to support them with sufficient funding to develop and implement region-specific First Nations housing solutions. 3, direct the AFM to reaffirm the Manitoba First Nations portion in all the regional portions of the $135.1 billion investments required to address the housing gap in all First Nations in Canada, as first outlined in AFN Resolution 59/2022. Transformative federal investment needed in First Nations housing, and as per the Closing the Infrastructure Gap by 2030 Comprehensive Costing Report. And our final, therefore, be it resolved. 4, call on the federal government to consider, as it contemplates what to fund through Budget 2025 and beyond, the cross-sectorial impacts such as improved physical and mental health and the corresponding cost avoidance elsewhere that result from access to safe and affordable housing for First Nations on reserve. The therefore be it resolved have been read into the record, so I will look towards our mover, Chief Munoz, for opening comments. On microphone number 1, please.
Thank you. That's a Tamiskat, no, I don't the guy, Gimaganak, Swaniak, get the Atsakuskatsak, I know, part the Megutanu, Katskas, putting Megats, get the Tamiskat, no, Mantoga, Sir de Mequa, Kaganagino, Hello, everybody. My name is David Munias. I'm Chief of the Nation for Pemichigamak, also known as Cross Lake. Hello to the chiefs, councillors, elders, youth, and everybody watching at home. And just a few points in English. The key points I have is that housing is a treaty right and human right. It's adequate housing is both a human right and treaty right and a treaty obligation. The lack of proper housing in First Nations communities violates treaty promises and deepens inequality. And we've been talking about closing the gap, the housing gap, the infrastructure gap. It is estimated that it will cost about $135 billion to close. And we were promised to do that by 2030. And this figure will grow without immediate action. It will continue to grow, as you know, that the cost of living continue to increase for our people. And same thing with the infrastructure, it continues to grow. Despite recent efforts, the gap between First Nations and the rest of Canada continues to widen, raising doubts about the government's commitment to reconciliation. I spoke to the Prime Minister before in this forum, and he stated he acknowledged that housing, health, education, food, water are a big problem, a big concern. And what he stated was, we must work together. And I take that to be literally, that we must work together. And he said that communities are best positioned to lead their solutions. He stated that here, and we must hold them to that, to those words. The federal government must act on this by fully supporting First Nations leadership and housing initiatives. There is a need for change. The Auditor General calls for a fundamental shift in housing policy, requiring full collaboration with First Nations. Ottawa must prioritize self-determination and community-driven solutions. Empowering First Nations. First Nations need sufficient resources and flexibility to develop housing strategies that meet their needs. And the federal policies must respect First Nations governance. As the Prime Minister said, Ottawa cannot drive these. You need to drive these, and we need to be there for you to support you. That's what he said, and that's what these omnibus bus, all these bills that we have, should be supporting everything that we're trying to do. You know, the call to action I'm saying is that the government must go develop housing strategy with First Nations, commit to long-term sustained funding, ensure First Nations lead planning and implementation. While generalization efforts are needed, real progress can and must happen now. And that's what we need. We can't be just on the sidelines and say, oh, by the way, do you like this? And give us a copy that we have to read within a few minutes, a few seconds. We can't do that anymore. We must be at the table to develop our own. And they must recognize that, that we have the answers. We need to build our own. We know what we need to do. So we're standing here, I'm trying to build about 40 houses with my own money, and what they're doing is that they're getting in the way, saying you need to do this, this, that, but that's not what I want. I want them to let us do what we need to do. I'm sorry for going over time, Mr. Chair, and I'm standing in an askamit now, that I'm scat now, I know because I'm going to go to it. It's a gap I
Thank you, Chief Munoz. And you had 5 seconds left, so thank you for that. I'd look towards our seconder, Chief Polchis, for your comments. Would you like to address the Assembly as seconder of this omnibus? All good? So then we will go to discussion. And just as a reminder, when we're talking about an omnibus, we'll be voting on the entire package at once. You can, however, suggest friendly amendments for specific draft resolutions. If that is the case, again, please name the resolution and get the wording to our teams, please. No one on microphone 1, so microphone number 2, please.
Chief Kelsey Jack from Cold Lake First Nations. I thought I had 4 minutes, but I have comments on Resolution 6 and 7. As the framework sets forth means by which the Government of Canada will be able to make the necessary changes for many important initiatives to support economic change for First Nations My comment is, this is on resolution number 6. AFN and the Chiefs Committee on Economic Development should push the Government of Canada for representatives alongside of economic development organizations and institutions on the development of ISK's economic reconciliation framework, given that ISK has committed to be working with the Inuit, the Métis National Council, and a group of First Nations economic institutions and organizations to develop an economic recognition framework that identifies economic priorities for Indigenous rights holders. And on November 2023, the AFN met with the ISK officials and was informed that AFN was not identified as a primary Indigenous policy lead in the framework, meaning that the AFN would not be engaged in the co-development process, but could opt to particular as observers. The recommendations do not directly urge the Assembly to support AFN representation in the development of the framework. Perhaps the recommendations can be revised to reflect. Okay, proposed amendment. Direct the Assembly of First Nations, AFN, to urge First Nations economic development organizations and institutions to develop robust technical support to First Nations rights holders in the identification and creation of economic reconciliation priorities and initiatives to support the primary role of First Nations right holders in this work. Oh, and I got 2 minutes left. Okay, this one's on resolution number 7. Recognize the First Mile Connectivity Consortium as a network of professionals for the support of First Nations telecommunications. I think there is some background and data missing from the resolution to explain who the First Mile Connectivity Consortium is and how it would support building such models for First Nations across Canada. The closing the gap undertaken occurred 2 and 3 years by ISK. However, no movement has happened in getting the depth of the Treasury to commit the funding needed to start closing the gap. It would be interesting to know if the AFN Commission evaluated the current state of connectivity in the First Nations community to demonstrate the need. Proposed question to the resolution movers in the Assembly. Do we know if the AFN has commissioned a report evaluating the current state of connectivity in First Nation communities to demonstrate the needs?
Thank you, Chief Jack. So we had one proposed amendment. I believe for draft resolution 6 is where you would like to see it. Is that the modification to 5? So I just want to make sure.
Number 6 and TBIR 5.
Microphone number 2, please.
Yeah, I guess the table already added some, and I'm good with it. Okay.
Ask the text to bring up 6.
If our technicians can bring up draft resolution 6 and scroll down to the therefore be it resolved, please.
Okay, for number 6, and to advocate, oh, it's up there already. Okay.
If our technicians can have 6 brought up. Okay, perfect, thank you. So, sorry, Chief Jack, that is the proposed wording. That is for your proposed amendment?
Yeah, I just wasn't too sure it was added. We had conversations, my text, but that's the word that's added. Okay.
The wording as is written here is, and to advocate that the AFN be included as a primary Indigenous policy lead in the economic policy framework.
Yes, we should have a seat at the table.
Perfect, thank you. So I'll look towards our mover, Chief Monias, yes, and Chief Polchis, yes. Thank you. So the amendment is adopted. We will now move on to our Zoom platform. We have Chief Lise Bahan. If we can have him brought up to the screen and unmuted, please. If Encore can have Chief Lise Bahan set up on screen. There you are. Chief Span.
I just want to do a friendly amendment to resolution number 8 on number 3 and number 4, where it talks about 135.1 billion investment required to address the housing. It should read the housing and infrastructure gap on number 3. And number 4, last sentence as well too, that result from access to safe and affordable housing and infrastructure for First Nations on reserve. That's my recommended amendment.
Perfect.
Chairman.
So just to make sure, again, on draft resolution 8, adding on therefore be resolved 3 to address the housing and infrastructure gap, and on resolution therefore be resolved 4 at the end of the paragraph that the result from access to safe and affordable housing and infrastructure. That is the wording. If we can have draft resolution 8 on the screens for the Assembly, please. So again, the addition of and infrastructure in therefore be resolved 3, and again, and infrastructure in therefore be resolved 4. Is that okay, Chief Lee Span?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect, thank you, Chief. So I'll look towards our mover, Chief Monias. In therefore be it resolved 8, adding and infrastructure in therefore be resolved 3 and 4. Microphone number 1, please.
We can agree to the amendment for number 4, but we can do that for number 3 because the $135.1 billion is for housing, not for infrastructure. Otherwise, we would have to change the whole numbering altogether.
So what I'm understanding is we would refuse the addition on 3, but include it in 4.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yes.
I'm looking towards our seconder, Chief Bolchis. Thank you very much. Microphone number 1 again.
Sego, Grand Chief Cody Daibo, Ganawage. I have 2 friendly additions, I'll say, to Resolution 6. But while that's being pulled up, just a quick comment. It would be just like Canada to not work directly with us, but work with the Métis instead. So, on number 3, for the therefore be it, I was working with the resolution individual. It would be call on Canada, provinces and territories to recognize First Nations as equals partners in discussions and decision-making on legislative measures, policy reform and renewal, and then with meaningful authority over policy outcomes and remove systemic barriers that impact their economies.
So we have the addition on therefore be resolved 3 of draft resolution 6, decision-making on legislative measures, policy reform and renewal. And then you also wanted to add with meaningful authority over policy outcomes. And can you repeat the wording?
And remove systemic barriers.
And remove systemic barriers. Perfect. So that's for the first proposed amendment. Were there others?
No, that's it.
Thank you, Chief Daibo. So I'll look towards mover. I got a thumbs up from mover. Chief Bolchis as a seconder. Thank you. We'll head to microphone number 2.
Check. Good afternoon. Zoom and Squenched and Squenched. Chief James Hobart, Spuzzum First Nation. Just a friendly amendment on number 7, our first mile. After electromagnetic spectrum, I would like it to say including the release of the remote rural broadband system, unused portions of the spectrum. We've had a resolution in 2019 asking for Canada and I said to release this, and they still haven't, and I just wanted to make sure that they know we're still in the hunt to have that released, and I'm just hoping that the mover and seconder will be okay with that. Cook Tim.
Thank you, Chief Hobart. So if we can have them pulled up on the screen for therefore be it resolved 1. About halfway through, this includes supporting First Nations access to electromagnetic spectrum. The proposed amendment is to add, including the release of remote rural broadband system unused portions of the spectrum. Is that it, Chief Hobart? Chief Monias? Yes? Chief Bolchis? Yes. Thank you very much. Look towards Zoom. We have no one for now. So back to microphone number 1. And I believe we'll close the speakers list here with our 4 final speakers. So microphone number 1, please.
Check. Tansen to temtek noa kumaganak.
Tamskat no Kakio. Ogamau Gary Layman, Beaver Lake Cree Nation, Treaty 6 territory. Just a couple of things. If on all of those resolutions, if we could make an amendment to change the wording from Indigenous individuals, people, to First Nation. And also, I wanted to ask about the voting process. Just real quick, if there is a chief that has to leave and there's a proxy that they put in place, how are they going to vote?
Perfect. So, for the proposed amendments first, look towards the team to maybe identify where the word Indigenous does appear. I do not believe to see it in 5. I believe there is one in 7, however. So we'll look towards that. And again, if a chief wants to nominate a proxy because they do have to, I'll wait for the resolutions team. Perfect. So we have the team that went through the wording, and we believe that the only place where Indigenous was used in this sense was in draft resolution 7, therefore be it resolved 1 in the second sentence. So again, changing Indigenous to First Nations communities. So I would look towards Chief Munoz. Chief Munoz, do we approve the changing of Indigenous to First Nations and therefore be resolved 7, or therefore be resolved 1 of draft resolution 7? I get a thumbs up. Look towards Chief Polchis and a thumbs up. Thank you. As for the registration process or the online voting, again, if you go to registration to name an official proxy, that is how you could update the link to this new person. So that's one of the beauties of having this system. We have microphone number 2, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. James Cutfeet from Kitchener-Merrick, Oak, proxy for Chief Morris. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to request a friendly amendment to resolution number 7, 2024 on telecommunications. And under the number 1, therefore, in the last sentence, this includes supporting First Nations access to electromagnetic spectrum and cellular service and the development of ongoing operations of the First Nation-owned and operated telecommunications infrastructure and services. And the reason for that is that, we have cell service in our community, and it's a remote First Nation. We only have a 40-foot tower with a 4-kilometer radius, and that doesn't cover our entire community. And if we have to move that tower to make it taller, it has to be 3 kilometers, or at least 3 miles away from the airport. And the other issue to that is that if we want to go alone to run our own self-service as a business or community-owned, the challenge, the biggest challenge is that the roaming agreement. It has, we would have to pay anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 a month, $5,000 to $10,000 a month extra, and we don't have the subscription base to be able to afford that. So, if at least if we can add cellular service, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Proxy. So again, adding at the end of including the release of remote rural broadband system, unused portions of the spectrum, comma, and cellular service. So I will look towards our mover. Thumbs up. Seconder. Thumbs up. Thank you very much. Microphone number 1, please.
Hello. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Assembly, and Chiefs. My name is Linda Hamelin. I'm here as a proxy on behalf of Chief Michael Seawalt from Barren Lands First Nation in northern Manitoba. We're an isolated community of approximately 600 residents. Barren Lands First Nation was denied housing infrastructure funding last year. In the last year, we've lost 4 homes to fires, and that has displaced at least 6 families. We have absolutely nowhere for these families to go except to double up or triple up in homes that are currently standing. The lack of funding has created a housing crisis within our community. So I'd just like that noted. I've been asked to speak on their behalf. Thank you.
Thank you, Proxy. And our final speaker, as we had closed the speakers list, I believe we had Chief Miracle at microphone number 2, who I see actively working with our resolutions team. Thank you for that.
Could you put resolution number 8 up again, please, on the therefore be resolved?
Perfect. So if we can have draft resolution 8 put on screen. And scroll down to the therefore be it resolved, please. There you go, Chief Miracle.
I think we need to include the numbers that are included in the $349.2 billion report that the AFN published with the advice of experts. The housing is $135.1 billion. Infrastructure is $59.5 billion. Digital connectivity is $5.2 billion. Critical drinking water is $0.7 billion. Road access was $35.5 billion. Education, $12.6 billion. Climate adaptation, $30.9 billion. Net zero, $12.7 billion. Accessibility, $1.6 billion. So I would just reference all of these numbers, that breakdown that's in the report that the AFN has got on, that is provided and published.
So I will look towards our resolutions team. Were those numbers shared with the team, Chief Merkel? And I'm also looking at the wording, since this therefore be resolved specifically mentions AFN Resolution 59/2022, we might have to look to see how those correspond or do not, if they were not included, or adding them at the end.
I've given the numbers to the clerk here.
Perfect. So we'll look towards our resolutions team to see, again, and therefore be resolved. Number 3 for draft resolution 8, the right to implement, right to the improvement of housing social condition. If there is wording that can be suggested to include.
There's housing and related housing infrastructure like subdivisions, electrification, internet, I would say, is part of housing. Building of gas lines that's connected to houses, that's housing. It's not just the building.
Thank you, Chief Merkel. So we'll take a few minutes just to wait for the proposed wording on this proposed amendment. We're just looking with the resolutions team to make sure that the wording would fit, since this one does reaffirm to Manitoba First Nations portion, as well as all of the regional portions, and also with the wording which relates to Resolution 59/2022, which is specifically referenced in this therefore be it resolved. Just be adding it up. We have wording that is coming up. So what is being proposed, I believe, again, to respect the phrasing in the first few sentences, would be to have either a new therefore be it resolved added, a subpoint which would then reference the numbers that were mentioned by Chief Miracle. Chief Miracle, if that is a process, would that work? Perfect. So we will be adding the different numbers as you see on screen. There's about 10 of them, so it might take a little while. But again, so the proposed amendment would be to have the addition of including at the end of therefore be it resolved 3, and then a list which includes the other types of funding and not only specific to housing. So we see here as they come up, 12.6 billion for education, 35.5 billion for yearly road access, 12.7 billion for net zero, 1.6 billion for accessibility, 59.5 billion for infrastructure, $55.4 billion for First Nations direct asks. I'm keeping on your heels. Resolutions Committee, sorry about that. We would have G, 5.2 billion for digital connectivity. And a final one, H, 0.7 billion for critical drinking water advisories. Chief Miracle, we're good with this? So I will turn towards our mover and our seconder. Approved. Thank you very much. As I had said, I had closed the speakers list, so I'm sorry, but we will be moving to the vote at this point. So if I can have our technicians set up our screen for the voting process. And again, this will be on Omnibus Number 1, Infrastructure and Economic Development, moved by David Monias and seconded by Chief Polchis, which includes Draft Resolution 6, First Nations Economic Reconciliation Framework. Draft Resolution 5, First Nations Labor Market Information. Draft Resolution 7, recognize the First Mile Connectivity Consortium as a network of professionals for the support of First Nations telecommunications. And finally, Draft Resolution 08, right to the improvement of housing, a social condition. So, since this is an omnibus bill, we will be voting on the package as a whole. If I can have our technicians open up the vote for omnibus number 1. You should be receiving, as we said, an email informing you about this vote being opened. I have Chief Polchis at microphone 1.
Chair, I have a question. Yes. I got 1% left on my phone. So my question is, if my phone dies, do I use my lanyard to vote, or does your staff have phone chargers?
There are supposed to be phone chargers throughout the room.
That's just a question. That's a reality I'm going on here.
Absolutely. There are supposed to be chargers around the room. I'll look towards distribution to help me with that. We have a plug. Very valid point, and to take into consideration. So AFN sponsored chargers, maybe? No? So again, voting is now open on omnibus package number 1, infrastructure and economic development. You should have received an email mentioning this, but you can also just return to the same internet page that you have, and you'll be able to vote. It should be, once again, that at the top of your screen. Don't forget to confirm your vote. It'll ask you, are you sure? Press that yes, submit vote, or else the vote will not be counted. We've got a few coming in, and again, since this is the first few times, we'll give you guys a bit more time to get your votes in, but we do see quite a few that are coming in right now. Again, omnibus package, infrastructure and economic development for draft resolutions 5, 6, 7, and 8 that we have just discussed. We also looked with our technical team for the question of having the numbers posted. Right now, there seems to be a technical limitation, but I should have access to them, so I will be able to verbalize them into the record at the very least. You're saying? We'll wait for, again, if there are any issues, we do have staff walking around with the blue lanyards. If you're having issues, connectivity, or with your account, just raise your hand and we'll come see you. I see we have microphone number 2, please.
Thanks. Just a comment. It's Chief Musquash from Pacebot First Nation. I just don't like the sound of how we're going. Like, you know, we had trouble doing the vote. And then we heard the word ominous bell. Heard that enough from the Canadian politicians. They're hiding stuff. And I just want to let you know, I don't care for that language. An elder, Gordon Wanabeds, said to me, this isn't our way. And throwing those words in there like this is not our way. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Musquash. We'll give another 30 seconds. If you're having any issues, please raise your hand again for Omnibus package. I'm sorry, Chief. Infrastructure and Economic Development, which includes resolutions 5, 6, 7, and 8. I'm going to look for one final time to see is anyone having any issues? Anyone need to raise their hand, or are we all good? Perfect. So I will ask that voting be closed. And as I said, we don't necessarily have the capacity right now to add them to the screen, but we do have them here. There was 6 abstentions, 4 opposed, and 4 had 175 votes for a total of 185 votes. So, Omnibus Package Infrastructure and Economic Development is adopted. I will now move the microphone over to Véronique.
So we will now address draft resolution 12. In your initial resolution package, you had draft resolution 12, 2024, and draft resolution 13. The mover and seconder have agreed to combine those 2 resolutions, so it has been amended. So we will read the amendments so that you can see the new draft resolution 12. You also have it probably, if you have not received it, you can go to distribution. You can have a copy of the revised resolution. Can we show the draft resolution, revised draft resolution 12, 2024 on the screen? Thank you. So it is entitled Call for Prioritization of Collaboration on the Second Generation Cutoff Rule. The mover is Chief I.D. Cook, and the seconder is Chief Angela Levasseur. Do we have mover and seconder in the room? Yes, here. Perfect. There's one on the phone. Perfect. So I will read the amendments. B. Under pre-1975 treaties, the treaty annuity pay list or treaty pay list documented First Nations band membership and tracked annuity payments as part of Canada's treaty obligations. These lists recorded the names of band members eligible for treaty payments, providing essential documentation for Canada's treaty commitments. C. In 1951, amendments to the Indian Act introduced the Indian Register, a centralized registry overseen by federal registrar, replacing the treaty playlist as the primary tool for documenting band membership. The Indian Register became the official record for identifying status Indian in Canada, centralizing control over status designations and band membership within the federal government, which formalized Canada's regulatory role of First Nations identity. E. Federal funding to First Nations cover only programs and services for individuals registered with Indian Act status, creating a financial gap for First Nations citizens and membership outside the Indian Register. F. There must be changes made to the Indian Act to clarify that women and their descendants whose status has been restored, connected, or improved by changes to the Indian Act are entitled to band membership, including in Section 10 bands. H, the second generation cutoff rule has significant implications for First Nations identity and membership. We can go further. G, so I will, yes, G, I will read it. Do I have to read?
You can just say in J that the community was.
J, okay. It was removed in J, so easy. Okay, therefore be it resolved that the First Nations in Assembly. So we passed a little too fast over there. There were some other amendments in the whereas that we haven't gotten on the record. Can we go back maybe to K, I think? L. Okay, perfect, thank you. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Action Plan, First Nations Action Plan measures. 7, 8, and 9 commits to ISC and CIRNAC to support the adoption of Bill C-38, which seeks to address discrimination in the registration and membership provisions of the Indian Act, co-developed a collaborative consultation process on a suite of broader reforms related to registration and band membership issues to support the co-development of opt-in alternatives to the Indian Act. Oh.
Just abbreviation changes.
ISC and CIRNAC, so abbreviation changes. And we can go down. So late fall, there's a major change there, minor. Therefore, be it resolved that the First Nations in Assembly reaffirm First Nations' inherent rights and jurisdiction to determine and define their own citizenship. 2, direct the Assembly of First Nations to call on Canada to immediately end sex-based discrimination in the Indian Act and take steps to recognize First Nations' inherent jurisdiction over citizenship and membership. 3, call upon Canada to prioritize and fund immediate and meaningful engagement for First Nations with the collaborative process on the second generation cutoff rule, recognizing the critical importance of immediate action required to alleviate adverse impacts of the current registration rules. 4, call upon Canada to provide appropriate resources, access to usable lands through increased funding made available to support First Nations experiencing population increases. 5, call upon Canada to prioritize First Nations perspectives in the collaborative process on the second generation cutoff rule, highlighting the significance of the matter for our future generations. 6, direct the AFN to take all necessary measures to actively engage with federal representatives, advocate for the interest of First Nations, and facilitate inclusive discussions that reflect the diverse perspectives and needs of our communities, nations, Indian registration. Direct the AFN to call on Canada to take immediate steps for First Nations to exercise their inherent rights and jurisdiction over citizenship that includes treaty membership outside of the Indian Act concurrently with necessary reforms within the Indian Act. 8, direct the AFN to call on Canada to immediately implement United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Action Plan measures related to First Nations citizenship and provide adequate and sustainable funding to First Nations to support self-determination and citizenship, over citizenship. 9, direct the AFN to develop a comprehensive advocacy strategy, including political lobbying and potential legal proceedings to ensure that First Nations jurisdiction over citizenship and ending sex-based discrimination in the Indian Act is prioritized and properly funded by Canada. So that's it. I will now ask the mover and seconder if they want to speak on the resolution. Yes? Mover?
Tanse. Chief Heidi Cook Nitsinakasan, Mr. Paiste Nation Tostin Kitata Miskatanawao Kakinau. Honored chiefs and distinguished guests, today I rise to address a critical issue, our inherent right and jurisdiction to define and determine our citizenship. This right is not just a matter of policy. It is rooted in our treaties and affirmed by international law, including the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Despite these protections, Canada continues to undermine First Nations' inherent right to citizenship through the Indian Act. The second-generation cutoff rule, one of the most damaging legacies of this act, states that after 2 generations without registered Indian status, the third generation loses entitlement to registration. In Manitoba, where First Nations face projected second-generation cutoff rates as high as 45%, we can't afford to wait another generation for action. In my own First Nation, 25% of our citizenship are now 6-2s. If we do not act now, we risk losing entire generations of First Nation citizens. This is unacceptable. Canada must act now to uphold its treaty obligations and address these injustices. Canada must also recognize First Nations jurisdiction to define our own citizenship outside the Indian Act. This includes fully implementing UNDA Action Plan Measures 7, 8, and 9, ensuring that funding is available to support all First Nation citizens, both those currently registered and unregistered, and facilitating First Nations' own systems of citizenship. We also cannot allow political cycles to delay this essential work. The issues of First Nation citizenship, treaty membership, and the second-generation cutoff rule are urgent matters of justice and human rights that must be exempt from any bureaucratic barriers that prevent immediate action. I'll say, chiefs, we're in the pot and the water's getting warm. The time to act is now, because if we wait, we're going to be cooked and we won't have a chance to change it. In closing, this resolution is a call to action, one that seeks to honor our inherent rights, respect the treaties we have signed, and secure a future where First Nations can define our own citizens and govern ourselves, free from the constraints of the Indian Act. Let us move this resolution forward with the urgency and determination this matter demands. Egose, thank you.
Thank you. Seconder, yes. On microphone and number 1, please.
Dancy. Chief Angela Officer, Nisituasa Cree Nation. Thank you. I am pleased to second this important resolution affirming First Nations' inherent right to define and govern our own citizenship. Since 1951, the federal government has controlled our identity and membership through the Indian Registrar, centralizing power within the federal government instead of its rightful jurisdiction within our own nations, and moving away from recognition of who is a member on the treaty annuity pay list. This colonial framework must be replaced by systems that reflect our own traditions, governance, and laws. I'm supporting this resolution as Chief of my nation and also a member of the Chiefs Committee on Citizenship of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. The second generation cutoff rule undermines the treaty relationship, marginalizes our citizens, and limits access to critical funding and services tied to federal recognition. Yet, there is no cabinet mandate on this matter and no funding allocated until at least 2026. Citizenship must be raised as a high order of priority. We need to move beyond the Indian Act now. The future of our people depends on it. We have identified that Canada must not only fix the ongoing sex discrimination under the Indian Act, but also prioritize at the same time supporting First Nations to develop citizenship frameworks outside of the Indian Act and begin to develop federal legislative ways to support our own laws. This resolution is consistent with the national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, calls for justice 1.2, calls for the elimination of gender-based discrimination in the Indian Act through recognizing, protecting, and supporting Indigenous self-governance and self-determination, making this resolution a necessary measure, not only for citizenship, but for restoring the rightful power and place of First Nations women, girls, and Two-Spirit individuals. We hope that with this resolution, our larger focus and prioritization on citizenship moves forward. Not only do First Nations need funding to support their own processes on citizenship, but we must focus and push to reflect the importance leadership puts on this critical issue. It is time for Canada to recognize our inherent right to self-determination over citizenship and to ensure that the resources are in place to make this a reality. My fellow chiefs and proxies, I ask for your support in passing this resolution to push and prioritize citizenship. Egosani.
Thank you to our mover and seconder. We will now open the discussion period. We will start by taking speakers on microphone number 1. We will go to microphone number 2 afterwards. It was the mover and seconder, that's why. So now discussion period 1 and 2. Can you open microphone number 2, please?
Madam Chair, the mover and seconder on microphone number 1, and then I move to microphone number 2 to be next in queue.
Yeah, I asked my colleague earlier, while the discussion period would be open, we would still start on microphone number 1. But
That's not fair. No, just kidding.
okay, thank you. Microphone number 1.
All right. Sorry, Chief. Anyways, Chief David Monias, Bimichikamak. I just wanted to add a friendly amendment to be added into therefore clause. Maybe as at the end there to include number 10, the state direct AFN to advocate that Canada that Canada should recognize that each First Nations should be able to consider applications for citizenship by individuals who may not meet Indian Act defined band membership criteria, ensuring respect for inherent jurisdiction and the protection of cultural and community identity.
Thank you. Resolution team will grab your amendment. 1 second. While we're writing the amendment, we'll take microphone number 2.
Good afternoon, Chief Wilfred King, Kiasagi, Nishnabek, Gulby First Nation. I don't have any friendly amendments, but I do have a friendly intervention, and I'm in support of the resolution. A few years ago, Senate told Parliament that when this discriminatory provisions went from Parliament to the Senate, Senate told Parliament, take all the discriminatory provisions out. We don't want to deal with this again. We want to deal with this once and for all. It kind of got stalled back in Parliament. And one of the things that concerns me, though, is that when you have a membership code, you're not considered registered with the federal registry. And the federal registry, the federal government only funds those who are on the federal registry, not people that are members of your First Nation. So, and again, that's a funding issue that has to be addressed. But if you look at the three cases, the McIvory case, the Dagenet case, and then there was the latest one was the enfranchisement case where they were in, I believe they were supposed to make those amendments, and now they're back in court because Parliament had refused to make those changes. So it's going back to court, and I think the double second parent rule is another provision that needs to be challenged in court and by a charter challenge. We did a comprehensive review. We have members as well that are caught in this second generation cutoff rule. And what needs to be done, there has to be a legal challenge to that provision under the Indian Act, and that's going to make some changes for a lot of our members. So just a friendly intervention. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Chief. We have the amendments written, so I will read it for the record. Direct the AFN to advocate that Canada recognize that each First Nation may consider applications for citizenship by individuals who may not meet Indian Act-defined band membership criteria, ensuring respect for inherent jurisdiction and the protection of cultural and community identity. Mover and seconder, do you agree with this amendment? Yes? Perfect. Thank you. I'm sorry, I saw the mover, the seconder agrees as well? Yes, okay. Microphone number 1.
Yes, I agree. I have another amendment to add. So throughout the resolution where it refers to sex-based discrimination, we would like to amend that to say sex and gender-based discrimination.
Already have them? Okay, perfect. So we have them already. Direct the Assembly of First Nations to call on Canada to immediately end sex and gender-based discrimination. And then number 9, and jurisdiction over citizenship and ending sex and gender-based discrimination in the Indian Act is prioritized and properly funded by Canada. Thank you. We have a hand raised online. Chief Fred Robbins.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Chief Fred Robbins, the northwest corner of the Secwepemc Nation in the interior of BC. I don't know if I want this to be in addition to the resolution, but my concern is around gathering of information that the federal government has. The federal government has been approving First Nations that are transferring from band to band to band. Those transfers also need to be part of this resolution, that these First Nations communities have the authority to deny. And one of the things that I think the federal government needs to do is provide information to the First Nations communities so that we can have access to lists that date back 3-4 generations. Because some of these individuals are not First Nations. They were married in. However, mysteriously, the husband passes away and they have other children. They remarry, have other children with a non-status or non-First Nation, but the women still hold the status. They gain status by marrying into the community. And I'm just curious as to how the federal government's gonna repair and fix that. Because we have some members that have no blood quantum at all, but they married into the band and no longer live in the community or have no plans of moving back to the community, but they maintain their status. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chief Robbins. I just want to clarify, was this a comment or do you have an amendment to propose?
I think some of it is being dealt with number 10, where the First Nations are recognized and may consider applications. I'd also probably add transfers to applications, like / transfers.
Thank you.
We can work with that.
Perfect. So the resolution team will work on the language for that and we'll come back later. We'll move to microphone number 2.
Good afternoon, Regina Crowchild, proxy for Chief Whitney, Tsuut'ina Nation. I just want to make a comment on citizenship. As stated by some, we have control or jurisdiction over our citizenship. But as we know, under the Indian Act, Canada removed that jurisdiction and put us subject to their Indian Affairs Minister who has to approve our citizenship. And then I come from Treaty 7. We have a treaty, and it was according to the treaty pay lists that the commissioners or the agents started writing our names, and then they stopped it in 1951, September the 4th. So they come from the prospect of, or with the opinion, that the last treaty Indian that dies before September 4th, 1951, there'll be no more treaty Indians. So that's still part of Canada's process to eliminate us and make us into municipalities and ordinary Canadians. Then there's the UNDRIP that came in. They put it under their laws. That declaration, they were supposed to amend their laws to conform with that declaration. Instead, they turn it around and it conforms to their laws. And they've never ended discrimination or what they've done to steal our authority and our jurisdiction. I just want to make those comments because we call ourselves nations. Why are we nations if we're subordinate to a state who was only here because of our treaties? Our treaties trump Canadian law. And we need to understand that. And I don't know how many times I've said this. We all say we're nations, and yet we're looking at Canadian legislation that undermines our authority, our right of self-determination. When they brought UNDRIP into Canada, they domesticated it, bringing our treaties into it. So we got to get our act straight, fellas. Do you want to be just mere Canadians, or do you want to be sovereign peoples? If you want to be sovereign peoples, then act like it. We got to look at this properly. That's why we say, as treaty peoples, we speak for our own inherent and treaty rights. Canada's got no business, the same with AFN. We speak for our own issues under our inherent rights in our treaty. So, because we're acting like nations. And you look at, and Canada's going to do away with Indian Act. They're putting in land management code, which is going to make our lands fee simple. That was never the intent of the treaties. Canada, or the Crown, has a responsibility that there will always be Indians and lands reserved for Indians. So we got to look at that. We got to move forward in our sovereignty. And the one thing I wanted to say, You know, if you're a nation, you got your peoples, you got your territories, you got a right of self-determination, you got your lawmaking authority, your governance structures, your justice system, your own spirituality. That's what we've got. Canada took it all away. So let's put it back to where it belongs and be strong and believe in yourselves.
Thank you,
This is our problem. We say we're sovereign and yet we fall under Canada's rule. So let's make a choice. And it just frustrates me. You know, we'll be, in the next few years, we'll all be just municipalities.
Thank you, Proxy. Thank you so much for your comment.
I got no, somebody else. Just let me finish a couple of minutes. I know I always get cut off, but that's okay. You know, we have to stand up for what is rightfully ours. We have treaties. Our treaties, they took away everything in favor of Canada, and they can't even, our peoples couldn't even speak right, or let alone read the English language. The unceded territories, they're still their territories if they're unceded. So we all, as nations of this land, the First Nations of this land, we have something in common. We are sovereign. Now, let's respect each other and stand up and demand that we maintain our own citizenship, because that's the way it was. Thank you.
Thank you, Proxy. We will turn over to microphone number 1, and before we do that, we will close the speakers list at this time. Microphone number 1.
Okay, good afternoon. Tatamskat na waki daw, ntotimag, gomin na wako magantig. Nanas ko muna matsadote, Bixquian, Tammy Cook Searson, Stihason, Utiuchi Saskatchewan, Stay Saganig Stihatio, Digochian. I'm chief of Lac La Ronge Indian Band, and I've been chief for over 19 years of my nation, and it's been a real honor to serve. And before that, I was a counselor for 8 years, so I've served my community for almost 28 years. And I've seen a lot in my time as chief and counselor. And this citizenship into our nations, niwapahtinis tamichito, awiyagi pinachapehwatigoa, niwespita mutotagishun. When someone comes to us for help and they're not a member of our nation, we say, sorry, we can't help you. You're not a member of our nation. So that's what we're creating, and that's what we have to think about. I am a 6-1 status, Treaty Indian. Both my parents were 6-1s. Both their parents were also 6-1s. And I married a Métis. My husband is Métis. And my daughter, she's a 6-2 because my husband is Métis. My daughter married a non-First Nation. So my grandkids, Sierra, Paisley, Aspen, and Jasper, are not treaty. They're Métis because my husband is Métis. But if my husband wasn't Métis, they would be non-status. So I am in full support of this motion because it's taken away the rights of our grandkids and our future generations. And like other speakers have said, soon we won't have any members of our nations. And now, and the mover had said too that, and the seconder, that we have to act now, because I'm impacted by this, and I'm not alone, I know that. Like it's impacting nations across Canada. And I'm grateful for the ones that have worked on this, the second generation cut off, because I don't feel that we should be cut off. I feel that my grandkids, my Chapans, should belong to the Lac La Ronge Indian Band, because that's their home. And what if we can change this, because it's a policy? And and someone turns away our kids, our grandkids, not being able to go for help, to be able to get that help that they need, the support that they need. We have our offices established in our nations. Like we have to open the doors, and I've seen that in Bill C-31. When Bill C-31 first came, many members were able to regain their status, which was really nice to see. But for a long time, it took a long time for us as nations to accept that. And I think it's important for us to continue to bring back our children, our grandchildren. And that's why I came here to speak for my grandkids, not only for my grandkids, but for all your grandkids, and your great-grandchildren, and the generations to come. So we must stand together, and we have to unite and be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your sharing. So we have reworded the number 10. So I will read it. Direct the AFN to advocate that Canada recognize that each First Nation may consider applications for citizenship or transfers by individuals who may not meet Indian Act defined band membership criteria, ensuring respect for inherent jurisdiction and the protection of cultural and community identity. Chief Robbins online, do you agree with the new wording? Does it reflect your what you had in mind?
Chief Fred Robbins, yeah.
Chief Fred Robbins? Chief Fred Robbins? Oh, we have.
Yeah. I was waiting to be unmuted. It wasn't my fault there. Sorry about that, Madam Chair. I just wanted to add on the end of the number 10 that the federal government will provide funding for membership research and access to federal vault of information.
Chief Robin, would you type this in the chat so that resolution team can directly add it to the resolution? Thank you. We'll come back to that after our comment on microphone number 2.
So Tsego, Grand Chief Cody Daibo with Milwaukee. First, I want to start, and everybody has different viewpoints on membership and citizenship. The overall concern is that anytime Canada gets involved with registration or membership, it becomes a disaster. I think this needs to be put on hold until the next assembly, until, as First Nations, we can discuss with each other in terms of what we want to do. In Kahnawake viewpoint, we handle our own membership, and we do it the way we want to do it. We don't do it the way Canada wants to do it or according to their laws. We just do it. The concern overall is that it's getting all muddled in. We're asking Canada to prioritize this. We're asking Canada to engage with us, to do this, to do that. Overall, I just have some big concerns with the repercussions that this could have if we don't discuss it amongst ourselves first, because what we do in Kahnawake suits what Kahnawake does, and it might not be what other nations want. This is just too broad and it's too muddled in, asking Canada for different things, involving Canada. At the end of the day, Canada should just get out of registration and membership and citizenship altogether, and then let the individual communities and First Nations determine what their membership is going to be like, and that should be the stage at the end of the day, and not what it fits under the Indian Act or how the Indian Act can be amended. It's what individual First Nations want, need, and how they view it. So That's what I'm asking the Assembly right now, is that we can put this on hold till the next Assembly and then have that discussion amongst ourselves on how we would propose this at another time.
Thank you, Chief. We had closed the speakers list. Was it to add something to the discussion? Yeah. Okay, so the last intervention, in the last intervention, Chief asked to defer this resolution to next Assembly to rework it. Mover and seconder, do you agree to postpone the resolution? Or do you want to deal with it now? I will ask you to now. Okay, so they said that chiefs can abstain, but they want to deal with it now. They've waited long enough. So the again. Okay, so it's already 4:26, and we have to close the Assembly at 5. So what I would suggest is that I will take one more comment, but not more than that, because we need to take a decision on this resolution for today. So I will take microphone number 1, and then we'll go to a vote.
Ogama Layman, Beaver Lake Cree Nation. Just a couple of things. It wouldn't hurt the resolution if the references to CANDRIP and UNDA are removed. I'd have an easier time supporting this resolution if that was the case. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Since it was a quick comment, I will go to microphone number 2 very, very quickly, please. Thank you.
Yeah, Chief Marcel Head from Shoal Lake Cree Nation. I think all of us chiefs across Canada received an email regarding the second generation cutoff. And if I remember correctly, there is a deadline that's coming up. I think this has to be dealt with today, and we cannot wait. You know, governments, you know, when they decide want to do something, they'll do it anyway, regardless if without our input. So I would suggest, you know, that we deal with this right away, because I have a lot of my members, you know, that are 6'1", 6'2", and it's becoming of a normal practice, you know, to sign a document that declares, you know, a child being a First Nation of my home community. You know, I think I signed 3 of those forms already, and it's going to continue. So I think, you know, today, you know, if we deal with this resolution right away, you know, it'll mean a lot to those people that are affected by what's coming down the pipe. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we will now go to the vote. You can open. If anyone still needs help for the vote, as it's new, you can raise your hand and we'll come and help you. Encore, can you open the polls for draft resolution 12? It's done. Thank you. Okay, so while we're waiting, yeah, microphone number 1.
Hello, Chief Wilfred King, Kiasagi Nishnabek. Often when you're, again, this is the problem with the electronic voting, and again, I'm supporting the resolution, but if you were opposed to the resolution, often you could have your name stated saying, I oppose the resolution, and often you're given the opportunity to state your reasons for that, or if you abstain, you could have it recorded that you abstained from the vote. This process doesn't allow us to do that. And it sort of changes fundamentally how, because I'm not speaking to anybody in the Assembly here, but if I was to vote against a resolution, and I would state my reasons why I voted against it, or if I abstained from the vote. So this electronic voting doesn't allow us to do that, where if you did it by a show of hands, you could say, I vote against a resolution, and you could state your reasons why. So I just, for consideration when we're doing this electronic voting, and I would suggest maybe that if there's contentious resolution, then maybe we should go to a secret vote. But if it's just support resolutions, I don't know if we should go to a secret vote. I just think we could expedite the process. So maybe we can get some clarification on that from the co-chair on this. Miigwech.
Thank you for your comment on the resolution, on the voting process. So thank you, Chief. We'll take your comment into consideration. It's a new process, so your comments are always welcome. Thank you. If you need help with the voting, you can raise your hand. We'll still have the polls open for the next 30 seconds. Okay, so we can now close the vote. Okay, so we have 6 opposed and 138 in support. So the resolution is carried. Before we go to the next resolution, I will just consult my co-chair. 1 second. Okay, thank you, Chiefs. I will hand it over to Adam for the next resolutions.
Miigwech, Veronique, for dealing with that resolution. And so we'll continue on Chiefs and proxy representatives, we did have 6 more resolutions we were trying to deal with today, and it's now 4:34. We're hoping to wrap up by 5 o'clock. Just a reminder on a couple of things. You create the protocols for this assembly. This is your space. You create the rules. Our role is to follow those rules that you've given us to implement. So there's a couple of things. Number one, the time frame. At the last assembly in Montreal, I'll say you, the assembly, the chiefs in assembly, created the protocol that everyone has 4 minutes to speak. And so you passed that this morning as well. It's our responsibility to follow the protocols that you've created. This is your space, this is your assembly. So what we will be doing is we will be following that 4-minute protocol that you've created. We will give you a friendly reminder at 30 seconds. We also have the time running up on screen. It's very small, sometimes it's hard to see, but chiefs in the past have asked for a friendly reminder so that you can start to wrap up your comments. So we will be doing that as we move forward, again, following your protocols that you've created. We will do it in a respectful way. Again, the guiding principle in this assembly is that we respect each other. So the time will be running. We'll give you a friendly 30-second reminder. Also, there are times where we have to close the speakers list because today we have not gone to all the resolutions. It is unfortunate to those chiefs that have resolutions that you want to deal with today. Unfortunately, they will be bumped to the next day. And our goal is always to have your resolutions that you've put forward dealt with in a timely fashion. So sometimes we have to close the speakers list. We will announce that we are closing the speakers list, and we ask everyone to please respect that so that we can get to all of the discussion and all the decisions that we need to make. Again, following the protocols. Miigwech, I just wanted to reaffirm that. So the next resolution we're dealing with is draft resolution number 9, 2024. If I can have Encore put it up on the screen, please. So draft resolution number 9 is titled Support for, and I apologize, I don't know if I can pronounce it properly, support for the recognition of Assiniboia Nation, also known as Kelly Lake Cree Nation. The resolution is moved by Chief Roger Williams, seconded by Chief Derek Archibald. Can I confirm that the mover is in the room? If you can just raise your hand, please. Chief Williams is present, thank you. Seconder, Chief Archibald, are you in the room, either in person or online? Chief Derek Archibald, are you in the room? Otherwise, what I will do is ask for another seconder. I do not see Chief Archibald, and we're just monitoring online as well. I don't see the seconder here, so with that, I will ask if there is. Oh, right here, thank you, Chief Archibald. Apologize, I didn't see you on the side. So the resolution is here. The resolution is before you. I will go right to the therefore be it resolved. So it reads, we have it up on the screen. Therefore be it resolved that the First Nations in Assembly 1 accept the Assiniboia Nation, also known as Kelly Lake Cree Nation, KLCN, as a member of the Assembly of First Nations, AFN, and support KLCN in their pursuit of federal recognition and resolution of outstanding grievances. Number 2, call on the Government of Canada and all levels of government to take immediate and meaningful action consistent with the honour of the Crown to ensure that KLCN can continue to exercise their inherent and treaty rights on their ancestral and traditional lands and territories. 3, direct the AFN to support the convening of a meeting between the leadership of KLCN and the Government of Canada to engage in meaningful nation-to-nation discussions on federal recognition and the resolution of all outstanding grievances. 4, call on the Government of Canada to recognize and engage directly with the leadership of KLCN in order to establish a discussion, recognition, and negotiation table. So that is the resolution before you. Mover, do you wish to speak to the resolution? You have up to 4 minutes. Microphone number 1, please. Are you the seconder, correct?
I'm the
okay.
seconder. I am not Chief Archibald. I just want to go on record. I'm Chief John Jack from the Hooyat First Nation.
Oh, a seconder. Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to the mover, who was right here somewhere. Is that the mover behind microphone 2? I know I had confirmation of the mover here in the middle here somewhere. Microphone 2.
I'm the motion in this. Chief Roger William, Hanikutin First Nations, Hilkotin. I also have the Chief of Kelly Lake here, and I want to hand the mic over to him within this time. Thank you.
You're good. Continuing with microphone 2.
Tache, I Ogamaonia, as near to Yo Nation, and in English it's Chief Cliff Gallio, Kelly Lake Cree Nation. We've been in battle with Canada for many years, since 1996, 97. In 2009, we were offered the special resolution, no special claims process, sorry, to go to special claims process. But the lawyer at that time was James O'Reilly. He figured it would not be a good process for our claim, and therefore he proceeded into the court system, which was not really a court, it was a case management process. And in 2010, he retired from the claim, and we handed over the claim to Davis and Company with Priscilla Kennedy, and therefore we had some work to do. And in 2013, every time we hired anthropologist professor to do research on our nation, because that's a requirement by the Government of Canada, the Government of Canada would steal that person from us. So finally we found a professor from Saskatchewan, Regina, David Miller, and while he was working, he had a stroke. So we spent $50,000 on the research. And with that research, we could not get back our information because his daughter would not release that information from us. So in 2019, the Government of Canada argued that they wanted to stay our proceedings because they didn't have no land to give us. He said, go to British Columbia and sue the government of British Columbia for land. And so they stayed our proceedings because we didn't have all our information ready. But as we went along, we were trying to find other lawyers to, Ms. Kennedy also retired in 2019. So I left us with no legal representation. Asking for lawyers within Treaty 8 in 2019, 20, nobody would represent us because it was all conflict of interest. Because in our process, our elders had told me in 1996 that, or even earlier than that, that there's a document out there identifying our nation to be signatories of Treaty Number 8. It was 1898 when our people were identified. But long story short, we were in the vicinity of Jasper and between Jasper and Grand Prairie.
30 seconds.
Okay. We left Jasper because Jasper wanted to make a national park. We moved to Grand Prairie, and then the settlers started moving in the early 1900s, so we moved to Kelly Lake, British Columbia, where we're at, and there was no borders at that time. It was called the Federal reserved for Indigenous people. But to make the long story short, we are in the process of working on special claims process, but also we've got everything in place. We've got everything in place that we need to be with Canada. We just need Canada to speed up this process, and we need your help here today. We need your help, and mi asin kakiyo matakapikskot to kasitosko ya kandem to what after kasino kanaiyo ito. For all the chiefs that are here from different communities, we ask for your support so we can be treated equally, just like the same every First Nations in Canada. Thank you.
I am going to go to the seconder who was standing by. Seconder, Chief John Jack, there we go. If you wish to speak to the resolution, you don't have to. You're good? Okay, thank you. So we'll start with microphone number 1.
Miigwech. Wujuni Chilgamakanak Nibin Makwa, Indigenous Kazmakwan Totem. I'm Derek Nepenak, Chief of the Minnegozi Anishinaabe, and I'm standing here speaking in support of this resolution. But I want to draw a bit of recognition to the broader issue that's at play here. And it's important to recognize that the Minister of Indigenous Services Canada can create an Indian band under Section 17 of the Indian Act. And I think that there's also a correlation to the issue of the fact that the minister can create an Indian under Section 6 of the Indian Act. So we have the minister creating Indians, and we have the minister creating Indian bands under the Indian Act. But what does that do to the historic treaty communities that are out there currently unrecognized, and the individuals of those historic treaty communities that remain unrecognized in Canadian law, because there's lots of them. And I'm here drawing recognition to, for example, the historical Treaty 4 band, the Duck Bay Band, who had a historical treaty annuity pay list with families' names on there for the last 150 years have not been recognized because they were amalgamated and co-located on the Pine Creek First Nation. I said I would speak to that at this venue today because we owe it to all of our family members out there who may not be status Indians, but they are definitely treaty beneficiaries. So what we're doing is we're taking the cap off a very, very important conversation. It goes to our sovereignty, it goes to our existence as treaty people. And we have to be willing to recognize the existence that there's a lot of treaty people out there that are not status Indians. And it goes into that broader conversation of how do we incorporate it, be inclusive, and be a safe and inclusive environment for those people that Canada may not recognize under the Indian Act, but we need to recognize them, under our responsibility to treaty. So I'm just speaking in support of the resolution on that front, because there are so many people left out of treaty right now. They deserve recognition. They deserve a seat at these tables. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Ogama, Nibenak. So we are hearing support for the resolution. This is a support resolution. We were about to get to the vote, but one more speaker, microphone number 2. Go ahead.
Hello, Kelsey Jack from Cold Lake First Nation. I have a treaty alliance with Ochis First Nations. I was going to get a member to speak here. Oh, here she is. She's running over here. So I'm going to give her time to speak on this. She is a treaty partner. We do have an alliance with her, so she deserves some time.
So we'll continue with microphone number 2. Go ahead.
Thank you, Kelsey Jacko, Crystal Beaverbones from Ochis First Nation. And so at this point, we do oppose this resolution, mainly because at this point we're unclear how this may impact Ochis First Nations traditional and ancestral lands. We do have some supporting documents on these lands, so just wanted to kind of put that forward, so thank you.
Miigwech, thank you. So I see no hands raised online, nobody else at the microphones, so we are going to call for a question. So questions being called, thank you. We take that under advisement, but we will we'll go into the vote. So I'm going to ask Encore to please open the electronic voting. The voting is now open. While we are doing that, I know that not everyone was here when we went through the process, the test vote this morning. I will summarize again the process of voting. We are modernizing the approach to voting, and the hope is that this will become much more efficient. Again, we have to go through some growing pains. There will be a bit of a learning curve, but we will iron out the kinks, and the process will start to speed up. A reminder, everyone gets an email at the beginning of the day, and once you open it up on your device, your phone or your tablet or your laptop, if that stays open, you do not have to keep going back to it every time. But as a friendly reminder, when we do open the polls, you will receive another email. You don't necessarily have to reopen the new email. If you've opened the previous email, it's there, it's available, and you can cast your vote. So the vote is either in favor of the resolution, in opposition, or you abstain. And I am able to see the numbers coming in, so I see the voting taking place. So it looks like we do have a lot of people still online doing the voting. Polls have been open for about 1.5 minutes, and we're actually doing fairly well. The process is starting to speed up. Again, this is new. It's new for us. It's new for you. The hope is that it will become more efficient. In the previous resolution, there was discussion that one of the challenges will be that if you are in opposition to a resolution previously, you were able to have that noted, whether you opposed or abstained. Yes, that was part of the previous process. Under this process, we don't have that mechanism. But the mechanism to state your opposition to a resolution is, as we have just seen right now. There was clear support for the resolution. The reasoning was stated. There was also opposition to the resolution, and the reasoning was stated. And that is taken as on the record within the Assembly. So I just wanted to discuss some of the, I know I see a Chief King, so I'll come to you, but I'm just also filling some time while the polls are open. I will be closing it very shortly, but I'll go to microphone number 1.
Chief Wilfred King, Hiasagi, Nishnabek, Galway First Nation. Thanks, Adam, and I thank you for that clarification. I think you're right that if you were going to vote against the resolution and you wanted your name recorded, you could say that at the microphone and then cast your vote. So I want to thank you for that clarification. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Chief King. And I'm glad I didn't have to cut you off after 4 minutes. Miigwech. Okay, so we're looking here. Polls have been open for about 3.5 minutes. It looks good. So I'm going to give it 10 more seconds. We will be closing very shortly. So we'll close the electronic voting, please. The voting is closed. So we have the results. Resolution before you, 24 abstained, 16 are opposed, and 102 for in favor. So the resolution carries. Miigwech. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Cedric to start to wrap up today's session.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Chiefs and Proxies, for your participation today. As mentioned, a bit of growing pain, but we see that the process is getting more and more efficient, so it's a good thing to see. So we will be closing and lowering the fires for today. We just want to talk about a few things. So we will have a pipe ceremony, as we have every morning. I believe it happened here in the circle of chairs, and that will be at 7 a.m. As well as tomorrow, we do have the Circle of Trade, which will still be open from 9 to 5. And we start with a panel tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Don't forget that quorum is based on the call to order. So just a quick reminder, have a great evening. Thank you for your participation, and we'll see you tomorrow.